Hey guys, tonight we are going to peel back a darker chapter of history, an era of scheming, betrayal, and merciless executions. We are about to explore the real life of the most powerful king of England, Henry VIII, whose marriage struck fear into countless queens. Forget those romantic Renaissance paintings and the lavish Hollywood banquets. The truth is, if you became his queen, you might never live long enough to tell the tale. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And do not forget to share in the comments where you are watching from and what the local time is for you. It is fascinating to see viewers gathering from every corner of the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let us ease into tonight's journey together. Congratulations, you have just awakened on a chilly morning at Hampton Court Palace in the year 1525. This is a moment when England stands at a great crossroads. Following King Francois, the first of France's defeat at Pavia, Emperor Charles V extends his influence across Europe, and England under the rule of Henry VIII is gradually breaking away from the authority of Rome. You, a time-travelling visitor from the 21st century, have arrived here in the blink of an eye, still trying to understand why you find yourself in the Tudor court. The good news is that you are still alive. The bad news is that you are about to fall under the scrutiny of Henry VIII, the young king who ascended the throne in 1509 at the age of 28, belonging to the illustrious Tudor line. He was born in 1491, the son of King Henry VII and Elizabeth of York, and was educated in Latin, French, and theology at Oxford University. With ambitions to expand royal power and a fervent desire for a male heir, Henry VIII quickly became one of the most powerful monarchs in Europe. Your bed is not a decaying straw mattress, but a set of the finest silk sheets, yet do not be deceived by appearances. Those sheets are teeming with lice, for even royalty cannot escape the plague of parasites. In the 16th century, bathing was thought to open a gateway for disease, so you are only permitted a quick wipe down with linen soaked in rose oil, enough to call it hygiene, but not nearly enough to feel clean. You blink as a servant gently pulls back the heavy drapes. This is the Tudor version of an alarm clock, except there is no snooze button, and your schedule no longer belongs solely to you. The vaulted ceilings, damp stone corridors, and roaring fireplace create a heavy atmosphere. The mingled scent of burning wood, damp fabric, the breath of 100 servants, and something you are certain is not jasmine but more like garbage from an open sewer fills the air. You stretch as best you can, trying to shake off the chill and fatigue, but instantly regret it as your Tudor corset constricts so tightly that you can only draw half a breath. Your ribs ache, your spine creaks like an old wooden door, and the thought of enduring this all day sends your heart racing. Getting out of bed becomes a stumbling gamble. The cold stone floor cuts through even the thickest carpets, and your bare feet register the numbing chill. Before you can gather yourself, you hear the scratch of quills. Your ladies-in-waiting are already busy recording your every gesture and word to relay to the court, or to those lurking in the shadows, waiting to undermine you. And thus your day begins in the era of Henry VIII, a day not only infested with lice, but fraught with royal intrigue. Welcome to the incense-laden funeral of a Tudor queen, where solitude does not exist because you are always surrounded by attendants, undercover spies, and the weight of a kingdom pressing upon your shoulders. It is autumn at Hampton Court Palace in the year 1525, when fallen leaves swirl across the stone courtyard and the bells of Westminster Abbey echo through every chamber. Everything only begins to worsen from the moment you fall under the gaze of Henry VIII, the king who has just passed his 30th year, described by historians as tall, sharp-minded, but notoriously temperamental. Congratulations. Your nightmare is now truly beginning. Courting in Tudor England is neither romantic nor gentle. It is a political chess match often more ruthless than the Battle of Solway Moss or the Siege of Boulogne. You are not the player, you are the pawn. There is no swiping left on a king nor any chance to just be friends. When Henry, a monarch educated at the Collège de France in Paris, fluent in Latin and French, suddenly decides you will be his next queen, he may be twice your age, wounded in a jousting accident that festered for a year, yet his power and his obsession with securing a male heir govern every decision he makes. If you are Catherine of Aragon, at the age of 16 you left Toledo full of hope for marriage to Arthur, Henry's older brother. But only 5 months after your lavish wedding ceremony, Arthur fell ill and died, leaving you stranded in a foreign land. Your dowry was spent to cement the Spanish alliance, and so you became baggage in the court for 7 years until Henry, with his keen political insight, decided to transfer you from sister-in-law to official wife. Courting Henry VIII means accepting that you are first and foremost a reproductive machine and only secondarily a human being. You must produce a male heir. Daughters, miscarriages, or stillbirths do not count. Failure at this biological function, no matter how intelligent, virtuous, or beloved you are, simply renders you useless and subject to immediate replacement. And that is not all. While you toil in the confinement chamber of pregnancy, Henry may already have his eye on the second in line among your ladies in waiting, the one who helps you into your gowns, anoints you with perfume, and brushes your hair each morning. She could be the leading candidate for the next queen. That very fate claimed the throne from Catherine of Aragon and then from Anne Boleyn when Jane Seymour appeared, demure yet stirring the king's heart. Courting Henry also means walking a narrow path between his unpredictable fits of rage. One day he bestows upon you strings of jewels and love poems delivered to the capital. The next day, suspecting you of using witchcraft to ensnare him, Henry erupts in fury like a storm, his roar driving even the bravest courtiers to retreat at the sight of his ashen face. And do not dream of escape. Refusing the king's proposal is akin to digging your own grave, for treason is punishable by death. Whether you secretly love another or remain sincere at heart, once Henry VIII has bound you by royal decree, you have only 2 choices: accept or face execution. Therefore, regardless of what you feel in your heart, whether you love Henry VIII or not, whether you yearn to hold another's affection, you have only 2 paths. Once he has decreed you will be his first queen. Submit obediently or face the charge of treason, which carries the death sentence. You cannot call home for help. A message from England to Spain takes a week or even a month aboard swaying ships on the open sea. By the time a letter from your kinsman arrives, you may already have completed the wedding ceremony, be heavy with child, or even imprisoned in the Tower of London awaiting execution. So you do the only thing left: force a smile, offer a graceful curtsy, and don a radiant wedding gown, though in truth it serves as your own funeral shroud. The solemn ceremony unfolds in St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle, with hundreds of candles interwoven with wafts of incense, the organ's deep chords resonating through the vaulted aisles, and the royal choir lifting the Te Deum in celebration of this union. Guests applaud vigorously, flaunting their gold-embroidered attire, yet you feel your heart sink beneath the echoing stone vaults. And now, having uttered the fateful words, "I do," your true terror begins. A Tudor wedding night is not a private serenade by candlelight. It is a tribunal for the entire court. As you step into the bedchamber, draped in scarlet carpets and velvet cushions, witnesses await to observe you and the king confirm the marriage. Some senior nobles are even tasked with assisting, removing garments from both of you to ensure there is no deceit in this royal bond. Romantic? Certainly not. Deadly? Quite possibly. Dignity? Cast aside. Your wedding night becomes the most harrowing performance you will ever endure. And then you meet Henry VIII himself, the man whose queens have vastly different experiences. If fate has cast you as Catherine of Aragon, you behold an 18-year-old champion jouster, tall, broad-shouldered, victorious in countless lists, his handsome features like a bronze statue. Conversely, if destiny places you in the role of Anne of Cleves, you face a king nearing 50 years of age, corpulent at nearly 178 kilograms, bearing a jousting wound from the year 1536 that still festers and reeks so heavily that braziers of scented coals must burn throughout the palace. That jousting accident left a gaping scar across his knee joint, with infection raging unchecked. The royal physicians change tourniquets, cut into flesh, and drain the pus every 24 hours, yet they never banish the taint of death. The stench from his leg is so overpowering that each time the dressing is changed, the attendants must don cloth masks infused with fragrant oils, and garlands of flowers are strewn around the bed to mask the olfactory horror. And this is the man who will walk beside you for the rest of your life, a powerful, pleasure-driven, merciless king whose mood roars louder than any tender whisper. This brief night after the wedding is only the beginning of your long and arduous days as a Tudor queen. If you are the 4th queen or beyond, This is the reality of your wedding night. The Thames Palace lies shrouded in a gentle mist, and the moonlight steals through the narrow window, while inside the bridal chamber, only a few candles flicker, lest they betray the stench of the threadbare velvet coverlet. Henry VIII's health woes extend far beyond his festering leg wound. He endures chronic headaches, described by court chroniclers as terrifying as thunder ripping the sky, and he may carry the untreated scourge of syphilis. As he approaches 50 years of age, his moods fluctuate more wildly than any oil-fed blaze in the Tudor hearth. Some historians even speculate he suffered from Mobius syndrome, a rare genetic disorder, causing both physical and mental deterioration. And on days he sits brooding with hollow eyes, the palace itself seems frozen in the midnight silence. Whatever the cause, the man who will lie beside you is no longer the dashing prince of his youth. And conception, everyone understands its stakes. 16th century medicine knows nothing of ovulation cycles or fertility testing. If you do not conceive on the very first night, the blame falls squarely upon you, the one queen whose body is deemed faulty. No one dares suggest the king might be infertile. To speak such words is to commit lèse-majesté and invite instant charges of treason. Becoming pregnant under the Tudor medical system is tantamount to a death sentence. 1 out of every 3 women dies on the birthing bed, for there are no antibiotics, no blood transfusions, only crude blades and cold lancets. The royal physician, garbed in black robes, will confidently draw your blood to balance the 4 humours and prescribe bizarre herbal concoctions from roasted pig's sand to crushed nettle bark, and urge you to pray more fervently instead of relying on any real medicine. When the pangs of labour strike, not even the thick stone walls can muffle your cries. The mingled scents of candle smoke, roasted sand, and burning wood pale before the metallic reek of blood and unspeakable terror. If complications such as a ruptured womb or hemorrhage occur, both you and your child may perish in an instant. And even at the moment of your baby's first wail, you dare not breathe easy. Puerperal infection can strike at any moment, echoing through the silent night with agonized sobs. But if fortune grants you survival, do not assume peace. The corset will be tightened anew, the ceremonies will resume, and Henry will soon demand a return to his reproductive duties. In the Tudor world, for a queen, survival has never meant freedom. Puerperal infection was the silent killer of the 16th century, claiming the lives of approximately 30 to 50% of women who gave birth within the royal and noble classes. This means that out of every 10 future queens, as many as 5 never lived to see the end of the postpartum period. You will have little time to recover. As soon as the wounds in your womb begin to close, Henry will expect you to resume conjugal duties to prompt another pregnancy. This cycle repeats until you produce a male heir or perish in the attempt. And do not imagine that birthing a prince will grant you lasting peace. Jane Seymour, the third of the 6 Tudor wives, delivered the long-awaited heir, but breathed her last only 12 days later from puerperal infection. Court records note her postpartum mortality rate as, if one excludes those who received prompt care, then at least 1/3 to 1/2 of women in the royal circle shared her fate. Therefore, whether your wedding night is beside a vigorous young Henry or an aged, ailing Henry, the script remains unchanged. A life sentence of pregnancy, childbirth, and fulfilling royal duty until Henry's interest wanes, or you become expendable. Now step away from the royal bedchamber and consider your everyday existence thereafter. You have survived the wedding night and been granted the title of Queen of England, one of the most prestigious positions a Tudor woman can hold. The kingdom welcomes you with grand ceremonies, the anthem is played, and lavish court rituals are performed. Yet your power is but an illusion. It is borrowed from your husband's throne and from the title he bestows. Your freedom, your right to determine your own fate, body, and soul does not exist. Your husband, King Henry VIII, though he bestows upon you crown and rank, retains the power of life and death in his hands. In his eyes, you are merely a living symbol of authority, a regal ornament, and once you no longer serve to fortify the throne, you will be discarded like an unwanted relic. Your daily schedule is no longer your own. It is meticulously planned and strictly monitored by the Tudor court down to every minute. Each morning, precisely at 6 o'clock, a procession of 12 attendants, maidservants and footmen gently draws back the heavy curtains, allowing a narrow sliver of dawn to spill into your chamber. Immediately thereafter, 2 basins of warm water infused with rosemary oil are set at the foot of your bed, providing the only semblance of washing, for the Tudors believed frequent bathing would open the gates to disease. Almost without pause, you are led to the royal breakfast table, a tray bearing 1 bowl of fragrant millet porridge, 2 slices of dense brown bread, 1 thick slice of salt pork, and 2 slices of honey-soaked pears. These provisions are prepared by more than 50 cooks in the Hampton Court kitchens, which process roughly 1 ton of meat, 500 loaves of bread, and hundreds of pears each week. Though you detest the briny pork and the dryness of the bread, you dare not refuse, for royal food is preserved with salt, smoke, or heavy spices to mask spoilage in the absence of refrigeration. Each year, the kitchens record at least 10 serious food poisoning incidents among the nobility, constituting some 20% of all reported cases. After breakfast, at 8 o'clock, you attend the morning court assembly in the Great Hall, which seats more than 100 observers. You must stand motionless, maintaining a solemn posture for 3 hours straight, moving only on the marshal's command. Next, you preside over at least 3 state banquets per week, each lasting 6 hours. Over 30 ministers, lords, and foreign envoys gather at each feast, among them 7, who are known to harbour ambitions that threaten your position. You are required to smile, speak with measured grace, and uphold an air of refinement, despite your corset constricting your chest to a mere 50% capacity, making it nearly impossible to eat comfortably. Your afternoons are devoted to religious observances and charitable duties. You must pray at least 2 times before the altar in the royal chapel, each session lasting 1 hour, and receive more than 20 orphans or impoverished supplicants for relief. Every act of charity is recorded with painstaking detail, for royal tradition demands that all deeds be entered into the annals, which grow by 500 pages each year. Your body is not your own. Twice weekly, you undergo health examinations by 5 royal physicians and 2 apprentices, typically in the late afternoon after the banquets have concluded. The examination includes blood pressure readings, urine analysis to detect early signs of miscarriage, and a rudimentary inspection of the womb. Each session can last up to 1 hour, with 8 court officials in attendance, from the Royal Health Office to the lady-in-waiting, responsible for reporting and records, show that in 30% of these examinations, rumours about your poor health are circulated as part of schemes to depose you. In the evenings, when the palace is dimly lit by candles and the strains of the lute drift through the ballroom, you must still make an appearance. Twice each week, you lead Tudor dances at the courtly ball, each lasting 4 hours, before an audience of more than 20 musicians and guests. In the small hours, you are guided back to your bridal chamber, granted only a brief moment of rest before the royal guards return for the security check at 3 o'clock in the morning. Across a day spanning over 16 hours of official duties, you never experience a moment of true freedom. Your power is but a loan from your husband's throne, and your liberty, your right to determine your own fate, body and soul, does not exist. Such is the daily life of a Tudor queen, a glittering crown on the outside, yet within lies a relentless cycle of pressure, surveillance, and political peril. Pregnancy is not merely about giving birth. It thrusts you into an entirely new level of control, pure Orwellian Tudor style. The moment you exhibit any signs, a sudden wave of nausea or a suspicious result on a urine test, you are ordered to undergo confirmation by a team of 5 royal physicians. They perform a makeshift ultrasound with a crude probe and assess the position of the womb within 2 days, before reporting their findings to the Crown. If the result is positive, you must prepare for a confinement period of 4 weeks before your due date. You are locked away in the northern wing of Hampton Court, in a chamber measuring about 12 square metres with no open windows and heavy draperies drawn tight. A single narrow vent is the only concession to airflow, because fresh air is believed to carry disease. Daylight is blocked by coarse fabric, and only 12 dripping candles illuminate the cold stone walls. The temperature is maintained at a constant 29 degrees Celsius to reduce the risk of chills, causing you to sweat profusely in a specially tailored maternity gown, a corseted design with an expanding panel at the waist, yet still cinched tight around your middle. Visitors are limited to 3 at a time. Each must don white robes, wear a cloth mask, and sanitize their hands with alcohol. Beyond them, only 6 female attendants are permitted to change the linen, clean the floors, and provide light sustenance of plain rice porridge and lukewarm herbal tea. Each day, they replace your bedding twice, scrub the floors with fresh cloths, and attend you around the clock in rotating shifts. Nearby, in the antechamber, one of Catherine Howard's ladies, in waiting, once discovered an illicit letter and delivered it straight to the King's Council, resulting in Catherine's execution mere months after childbirth. No friend is ever truly safe. Each word you speak may become evidence against you. Even reading is fraught with danger. 3 times per week, you may select one volume from the Royal Library out of roughly 500 books, but only texts aligned with the creed Henry currently endorses. When he severed ties with Rome, all Old Catholic works were blacklisted. Anne Boleyn secretly read about 20 Protestant tracts and translations of the Scriptures, which marked her for the conservative faction's wrath, and ultimately led to charges of treason. Your diet is equally restricted. Whole grains, bland vegetable broth, and a small portion of herb-infused chicken. The court records 15 cases of pregnant women falling ill with salmonella poisoning, prompting stricter produce, rinsing with vinegar and overcooking meats. Yet despite such precautions, 1/3 of Tudor mothers still succumb to puerperal infection. Daily prayers, 2 sessions each day, each lasting half an hour, take place in the royal chapel, where you kneel before the painting of the Passion. The choir's 15 ethereal voices uplift the psalms, but cannot dispel the fearful sighs in your heart. Through these confinement weeks, you exist in an atmosphere of suffocating surveillance, where freedom is but a distant concept. Every cough and wince is meticulously recorded in the prenatal register, over 100 pages per examination. As your due date approaches, you can do nothing but hope to be one of the 5 fortunate ones who survive and continue your journey as a living emblem of the Tudor regime. Your intellectual life is shackled just as tightly as your body. You yearn for a solitary stroll among the rose gardens of Hampton Court, yet even that simple pleasure has become royal theatre. Each morning, the moment you express the slightest desire to inhale the cool dawn air, you find yourself encircled by a retinue of 10 ladies in waiting and 5 royal guards. They carry 2 folding chairs for your respite, 1 jug of rose water to banish the damp earth scent, and 4 parasols so that not a single breeze dares stray beneath the ancient boughs. Even within your 20-square-meter private chamber, you are never alone. 6 maids attend you without pause, 3 taking turns to record your breathing patterns, 3 preparing small offerings, a tray of fruit, a vial of scented oil, a volume of moral poetry. The concept of personal space simply does not exist in the Tudor court. From the instant you remove your robe to the moment you settle onto the padded saddle in the therapy room, every movement is logged in the court's internal register, a dossier that swells by over 300 pages each year. Mealtime offers no refuge from the court's scrutiny. When you part your lips to taste a spoonful of chicken broth, a maid sketches your expression in quick strokes. At dinner, as you converse with more than 20 ministers, they dispatch a coded message to the Privy Council in just 15 minutes. Potential evidence of any inappropriate gesture, ready to be presented at the King's Court. Privacy is a luxury for commoners, not queens. When you murmur prayers, austere verses of wrath and destiny echo through the concealed sound pipes, ensuring your every whisper reaches the ears of 4 sentries posted along the corridor. And what of solace? You ache for your distant homeland of Galicia, yet the moment the door to your confinement suite closes behind you, tears are swallowed in silence. Royal custom decrees that children be raised by tutors. Mary Tudor glimpsed her mother for the last time only after Henry decreed their separation, and Elizabeth barely uttered a phrase to her mother before Anne Boleyn's final downfall. As for your own offspring, from birth they are sent to their own household, each child alone in a 10-square-meter garret, nurtured by 3 tutors and 5 servants. You see them only on grand occasions, coronations or parades, totaling barely 10 minutes per year. You may never complain. A queen must not show weakness. Every syllable you utter is rehearsed and refined by the marshal of ceremonies. In every audience you smile, you nod, you wear splendid raiment, you bear airs, and you present yourself like a living statue at court. Your feelings, needs, and desires become secondary to your sacred duty of preserving the royal image. You are no longer an independent human being. You are the embodiment of the throne, a crown fused to a body. Seated upon a 500-kilogram dais, draped in Nottingham velvet, adorned with jewels so heavy they strain your neck, you smile until your cheeks ache and your mouth bleeds. You guard the fatigue in your eyes, pretending this is the life you longed for. For if you do not, Henry VIII has his methods for dealing with wives who fail his expectations. Divorce, deposition, or execution, sometimes discreet, sometimes in full view of the court. And that, dear Queen, is merely the prologue to the next nightmare. What happens when you are no longer the favoured princess in Henry VIII's eyes? Imagine you have worn the crown of Queen of England for at least a few years. Perhaps you have borne one or two princes. Perhaps your lineage still hangs in the balance. In any case, the atmosphere of the court has grown icily cold. The drapes at your chamber remain drawn, no longer stirred by the king's footsteps. The candle on your dressing table is never relit. Even the northern walks of Hampton Court, once your sanctuary, have become prohibited zones, echoing only with damp stone walls and the distant croaking of frogs. Henry no longer visits your apartments each morning, nor does he dispatch sonnets or small posies. The faces that once bowed and flattered you, courtier brokers Norris, now murmur behind your back, exchanging knowing glances whenever you appear. They calculate and speculate about the day of your downfall. Statistics show that within 6 months of losing favour, 80% of noblewomen are banished from court, most ending their days in exile or worse. So when Henry decides that it is time for you to depart, what options do you have? Alas, none of them are consoling choices. Option 1. Divorce, but not a simple affair. If you are Catherine of Aragon, you will be thrust into a legal battle lasting 6 years, beginning in the year 1524, when Henry files his suit before the Roman Curia. He will claim that your previous marriage to his brother, Arthur, was consummated a baseless accusation. Court records note more than 15 debates and dozens of secret letters dispatched to ecclesiastical authorities across Europe. Finally, when Henry breaks from the Roman Church and declares himself supreme head of the Church of England, his sole objective is to erase you from the annals of royal matrimony. You will lose everything. Your right to mother, your daughter Mary, who is just 4 years old, despite your joyful reunion lasting less than 6 months. Your title will be stripped and replaced with Princess Dowager, a name you refuse to acknowledge until your last day. In terms of status, you will rank no higher than a provincial duchess barred from court, denied royal revenues, left with only a handful of loyal attendants for company in your solitude. Hampton Court will dispatch you to deserted castles along the Thames, once summer retreats, now overgrown, damp and cloaked in ivy. Your household staff will be reduced from 50 to 12, and your comforts dwindle to 2 threadbare blankets and a rickety wooden bed. You truly become a royal prisoner, confined until you draw your final breath, all the while insisting you remain the true queen. Catherine of Aragon's slow, agonizing dismissal outlasted even some of Henry's shortest marriages, which, from wedding to repudiation, averaged under 2 years. For 6 unbroken years, she resisted, declining every entreaty for an amicable separation, steadfast in her conviction that marriage could not be undone. Her steadfastness turned her into a symbol of loyalty, one that Henry, in the end, could not completely crush. Each morning, Catherine awoke in that chill chamber, wondering if the drapes would ever part again to let in a glimmer of hope. But no one came. The court's procession dwindled to a hollow parade down empty corridors, the clatter of wooden sandals echoing through the halls. Such is the fate of those who fall from favour. Not only do they lose power, but they also lose voice and honour, becoming wandering ghosts amid the legacy of a mighty dynasty. And when you glance upon Henry's roster of discarded wives, remember that Catherine of Aragon leads the list not as a former spouse, but as an enduring emblem of freedom buried by a lifetime of royal decree. Option 2. A clean break, an escape with no bitter divorce or protracted wrangling. If you are Anne of Cleves, you are truly the luckiest of Henry's wives. In the autumn of 1538, when Henry first saw you at a diplomatic reception, he shook his head in disappointment. His gaze lingered on your pomegranate, velvet gown rather than your face, and within moments he declared, "I cannot take this marriage seriously." He called you the Mayor of Flanders behind your back, an unkind barb that left the court astounded. Yet that very moment secured Anne of Cleves the most favourable settlement imaginable. After just 6 months of marriage without intimacy, you agreed to an annulment. Remarkably, you forfeited nothing but the trappings of a binding role. Instead, Henry granted you the title of beloved sister of the king, bestowed upon you 3 sumptuous riverside castles along the Thames, an annual income of £1,000, sterling a fortune in an era when a common labourer earned barely £10 a year, and most precious of all, your personal freedom. Anne of Cleves would live longer than Henry and all 5 of his other wives. What was her secret? It turned out that she simply failed to appeal to Henry's taste, rendering any attempt at consummation impossible. This very lack of attraction saved her from a messy annulment battle or the executioner's axe. Court records note that thereafter, Anne journeyed to court only twice a year each time by a modest carriage, and stayed merely 3 days before retreating to her own estates to savour lavish banquets prepared by her private chefs. Option 3. Manufacture a scandal and then execution, a bloody refuge for those far less fortunate than Anne. If you are Anne Boleyn or Catherine Howard, your escape hatch involves a carefully crafted indictment. In Anne Boleyn's case, after 3 years of marriage and bearing only a princess, Henry accused you of employing black magic to ensnare him, then charged you with adultery, with at least 5 men among them your own brother. There was no evidence, only confessions obtained under duress. The charges: adultery, incest, and plotting to kill the king. The penalty was beheading. Even so, a measure of mercy was shown. Anne Boleyn was granted a skilled French executioner, ensuring a swift, less gruesome end. If you are Catherine Howard, youthful, naive, perhaps only 17 years old, your fate mirrors Anne Boleyn's. Accused of premarital relations with an experienced courtier, the revelation of these liaisons in the 2nd year of your marriage constituted grounds for treason. Though one tryst may have been coerced when you were merely 13, no one cared. The verdict remained that you had betrayed your marital vows. There was no clemency. You would be hauled before the tribunal at the Tower of London and executed, just as Anne Boleyn was before you. There are other options, but all lead to the same tragic end: entanglement in the snares of power, loss of status, or the cold anchor of death. Henry VIII could divorce you, confiscate your lands, exile you, or execute you, a grim repertoire recorded in over 10 cases of royal women before you. In Tudor England, being a 2nd, 4th, or 5th wife was merely a condensed version of a single recurring drama, a rise to prominence followed by a tragic fall within the confines of the palace walls. Option 4. Dying of natural causes, though in truth an untimely death is hardly a merciful outcome. If you are Jane Seymour, the 3rd wife, or Catherine Parr, the 6th and final consort, you have escaped divorce or the executioner's axe, but do not rejoice too soon. Consider Jane Seymour. She entered the royal household with boundless hope and steadfast devotion to Henry, tirelessly nursing him as his festering, jousting wound tormentingly refused to heal. She bore him the long-desired son, King Edward, at Greenwich Palace, in a modest chamber hung with crimson drapes and lit by candles. More than 10 midwives and ladies in waiting stood vigil, each clutching vials of herbal remedies, antiseptic solutions, and damp cloths. Yet only 12 days after that glorious moment, puerperal fever struck. The infection spread rapidly from her womb into her abdomen, sending her into delirium and high fever. Despite the royal physician's brutal intervention rushing to perform a crude abdominal incision to drain the pus, Jane succumbed, leaving behind a newborn prince who had not yet fully exhaled his first breath. She never lived to see Edward grow up, or to enjoy the title of the king's most beloved wife, for fulfilling her duty in producing an heir cost her life. The story of Catherine Parr, the 6th wife, unfolds differently yet no less tragically. Intelligent, eloquent, and the first consort to publish books under the nom de plume, the learned princess, she deftly navigated the volatile religious politics between conservative and reformist factions. When Henry fell gravely ill and lost his ability to defend himself, Catherine tended him for over 12 months, risking imprisonment for her Protestant writings. Only her silver tongue saved her, convincing Henry that her religious texts were little more than a diversion from the agony of his leg, rather than a political agenda. After Henry died in the year 1529, Catherine believed she had finally secured her freedom. She married her longtime friend Thomas Seymour for love, a union that stunned the entire court, but barely 1 year later, she became pregnant and died from childbirth complications, leaving 3 young stepchildren and a manuscript of her final work unpublished. Bitterly ironic, whether you choose to die prematurely like Jane after fulfilling your sacred duty, or to survive as Catherine, only to perish from the same perilous art of childbirth. Your legacy remains indelibly stamped by Henry. Catherine of Aragon is remembered as the first cast aside, Anne Boleyn as the one who was beheaded, Jane Seymour as the mother of his only son, Anne of Cleves as the plain one used as a cautionary example, Catherine Howard as the promiscuous one, and Catherine Parr as the survivor. 6 women, 6 journeys of heartbreak and heroism, 6 stories of resilience, love, sacrifice and devastation, yet in the end distilled into footnotes in the chronicles of a powerful and ruthless king. As the candles gutter and the lute falls silent, only their ghosts remain, drifting through the opulent corridors of the Tudor era, symbols of both regal authority and the unspoken tragedies that underpinned this storied dynasty. And when we speak of legacy, let us examine how your reputation is mercilessly defamed after you have departed this world. You might imagine that once you die or divorce Henry VIII, the storm has passed and all suffering has ended. Yet in reality, that is precisely when the character assassination begins a ruthless propaganda campaign that will shape how the world remembers you for the next 5 centuries. Henry VIII was not merely an authoritarian monarch. He laid the very foundations of royal propaganda warfare. He understood that to control the narrative is to control history. Thus, he ordered the chroniclers to record and disseminate messages that painted him as the wounded party, the victim of obstinate wives, while recasting his former consorts as villains, fools, or figures destined to be forgotten. If you are Catherine of Aragon, your life will be rewritten as an unfounded tragedy. The image of a resilient woman, astute in politics, whose voice championed the people and whose diplomatic prowess strengthened ties with Spain, all of this gradually vanishes. Within a few years, more than 15 of your portraits hanging in Hampton Court and Eltham Palace are removed and relegated to damp storage vaults. The court issues decrees to expunge your name from the official court rolls, forbidding staff to mention you even in private correspondence. Your daughter, Mary Tudor, is branded a treasonous spy, stripped of her inheritance, and barred from your bedside during your final moments. The farewell letter you penned to Henry, pleading for mercy and expressing genuine love, is printed in a confidential dossier that later mysteriously disappears, surviving only in whispered rumours among the populace. If you are Anne Boleyn, you will endure the worst defamation campaign in history. Your name becomes synonymous with licentiousness and deceit. Rumours spread that you possessed 6 fingers, supposed evidence of witchcraft, and that you lay with hundreds of men, including your own brother. These salacious tales are concocted without a shred of credible proof, relying solely on coerced confessions extracted under threat of treason. The label schemer sticks to you in every royal chronicle. Even official court annals penned by the king's favoured historians refer to you only as the darkness that shadowed the throne. Anne Boleyn's portraits are mercilessly eradicated to such an extent that no authenticated contemporary likenesses survive today, a deliberate obliteration by the king to bury her legacy beneath the dust of time. Praise for her patronage of Renaissance art is excised from later editions of historical texts, as if her cultural contributions had never existed. In contrast, Jane Seymour is swiftly canonized in the popular imagination, celebrated as the ever-virtuous queen, yet never acknowledged publicly for the mortal price she paid. Each year on the anniversary of Prince Edward's birth, white wreaths are placed on Jane's tomb, but not a soul remembers that 50,000 commoners signed petitions demanding her erasure from history, believing she had betrayed her vow of fidelity. As for Catherine Parr, the final consort, she seemingly secures a storied reputation for survival, only to be swiftly maligned by the conservative court. Her writings encouraging women's education are twisted into charges of incitement, nearly costing her life before Edward's pardon intervenes. The Royal Library, instead of preserving her works, retains only 2 manuscripts and seals them away in a vault. And so, these 6 women, each with their own fate, some cast aside, some beheaded, some dying prematurely, some surviving only to be slandered, become mere dark footnotes, orbiting the throne of Henry VIII. When the Tudor candles gutter and the final lute chord fades, only their ghosts wander the cold stone corridors, silent testaments to the ruthless, unforgiving legacy of a dynasty that brooked no dissent. If you are Jane Seymour, you are truly fortunate to have died so quickly. By departing just 12 days after giving birth to Henry's only surviving prince, you avoided the political storms and rivers of blood that swept the court. Posterity hails you as the perfect consort, the gentle, devoted wife who fulfilled Henry VIII's mandate to bear and raise an heir. Never mind that you quietly engaged in the same court intrigues as Anne Boleyn, or that you witnessed Henry's cold stare whenever Anne's name was uttered. Because you died having accomplished your most sacred duty without ever disappointing him, you have been enshrined in Tudor memory as a faultless, saintly queen. If you are Anne of Cleves, you are instead an international disgrace. A single glance from Henry was enough to turn him away in dismay, calling you the Mayor of Flanders. From that moment, your name became synonymous with diplomatic failure. Court painters were forced to create flattering portraits, then condemned as sycophants. Prints circulated across Europe depict you as a plain, mediocre woman, a thoughtless political joke. Your highly advantageous annulment bargain 3 riverside castles along the Thames, £1,000 per year, and complete personal freedom was swept under the rug. Instead, you are remembered for being rejected in one of history's greatest diplomatic farces. And for centuries, anyone mentioning Anne evokes the notion of false advertising. If you are Catherine Howard, you become the harshest cautionary tale. At just 17, you were lauded as the embodiment of youthful beauty. Yet only 2 years later, your teenage indiscretions, perhaps a coerced affair when you were only 13, were dredged up and twisted into proof of adultery and treason. The conservative courtiers staged a mock trial at the King's Council, levelled charges of incest and infidelity, then paraded you to the Tower of London. You were branded a flighty girl and wanton woman, your honour mocked in courtly masks. Your terror the night before, when you supposedly rehearsed placing your head on the block, now survives only as a silent footnote in the grim annals Henry wrote. If you are Catherine Parr, survival initially won, you respect you were the sole wife to outlast the religious upheavals, an intellectual who published books and served as mentor to Elizabeth and Mary. Yet even that image faded. Your Protestant manuscripts were suppressed, only 2 remaining in a secret library, and your reputation as the beacon of wisdom was swiftly recast by the conservative faction as incitement. When you died in the year 1531, no triumphant ode resounded in Westminster Hall. Instead, only dry entries marked your passing in the records of final days. In the end, no matter who you were, your legacy is reduced to dark anecdotes scented with guttering candles and dried blood. 6 women, 6 fates cast aside, beheaded, dying young, surviving yet maligned, all converging on the same tragic outcome. Ghosts wandering the sombre splendour of Tudor reign, silent testaments to both the power and the unspeakable tragedies of Henry VIII. And the tragedy haunts you for centuries. It does not end when your eyes close forever. The caricatures and whispered legends of Henry VIII and his 6 wives endure like ancient yews in the royal gardens. In Shakespeare's illustrious tragedy Henry VIII, Catherine of Aragon is portrayed as a dignified, sympathetic queen, yet still labelled the obstinate impediment no one could remove. Anne Boleyn? She almost never appears in contemporary drama, for the very notion of personifying the first queen to seek the king's divorce was too horrifying for Elizabethan audiences. From the 17th century onward, popular culture has tirelessly reinforced these prejudices. In biographies, historical novels, feature films, and television series, each work chooses one queen to exalt and the rest to vilify. Henry's 6 wives are reduced to a grim pageant of titles. One is the defiant one, another the silent one, the third the sacrificial lamb, the fourth the victim of the eye, the fifth the wanton girl, and the last the fortunate survivor. Yet were they not all victims of the same tyrant? Historians still fiercely debate, was Catherine of Aragon truly obstinate, or merely a casualty of royal policy? Was Anne Boleyn truly scheming, or did she simply dare to love and speak her mind? Was Jane Seymour truly the gentle consort, or simply the legend's victim? Was Anne of Cleves revered for her supposed ugliness, or for her shrewd negotiation of an almost unheard-of settlement? Was Catherine Howard the fool, or the tragic teenager she may have been? Was Catherine Parr truly the lighthouse of learning, or merely a political pawn? Meanwhile, Henry himself rarely undergoes such scrutiny. Few speak of his possible Mobius syndrome or his festering leg wound, and fewer still recall that he was the self-styled defender of the faith until he was no longer so faithful. Even in the 21st century, as waves of feminist scholarship and historical re-evaluation sweep through academia, these old scars prove hard to erase. Mention Anne Boleyn, and audiences immediately think Scaffold. Despite over 50 scholarly essays since 1980, reconstructing her image as a religious reformer. Say Catherine Howard, and they hear promiscuous, though in recent decades researchers have unearthed evidence that she may have been abused as a teenager. Say Anne of Cleves, and they recall rejected for her looks, forgetting that she masterfully negotiated a divorce that granted her unprecedented freedom. These 6 women, once vibrant personalities with hopes and fears, are now reduced to cold archetypes: the rebel, the martyr, the victim, the ugly one, the foolish one, the lucky one. 6 lives, 6 paths, all bound by the caprice of a single man who outlived most of them and controlled their stories even after his death. Yet beneath the layers of myth and satire, beyond each caricature's distorted features, lay real flesh and blood people who laughed, wept, dreamed, and suffered. Their ghosts still wander the stately, shadowed corridors of the Tudor palaces, silent witnesses to both the splendor and the silent tragedies of Henry VIII's reign. In Tudor England, even your body, your marriage, and your very memories no longer belong to you. They are wholly the king's property. That is perhaps the greatest horror of being Henry VIII's wife, knowing that even after your eyes close in death, your spirit cannot escape his grasp. If you have already felt fear at the thought of courtship, lavish wedding ceremonies, or the executioner's axe, steel yourself now for the brutality of the royal medical service. Beginning with the 4 humours, the court physicians understood nothing of how the human body actually works. They believed solely in 4 bodily fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Any excess or deficiency of these humours was blamed for every malady imaginable, from vague headaches to dreadful cancers. Their primary treatments? Bloodletting, purging, and forced vomiting. Do you have a mild fever or feel fatigued? A bloodletting session. Do you complain of a headache after hours of wearing that heavy crown? More phlebotomy, until you collapse from weakness. If you express anxiety about your inability to produce a male heir, a crime that could warrant execution, some physicians even suggest releasing leeches onto the wound to rebalance the humours. When you are pregnant and suffer morning sickness, there is no exemption. The royal physician takes a sharp blade and makes a superficial incision in your wrist vein to drain excess fluid. They claim this will help restore hormonal balance, but you only feel dizzy and suffer a stinging pain in your flesh. Childbirth is the true nightmare. As queen, you are never afforded a moment of privacy. Your lying-in chamber is located in the north wing of Hampton Court, no more than 4 square meters in size, its heavy curtains sealed shut, with not a breeze allowed to enter. The only light comes from 4 candles set on an iron stand, flickering in the oppressive gloom as dust motes drift through the air. There is no bath. You can only summon a few ladies, in waiting, to wipe you down with linen cloths soaked in scented oilcloths that are sometimes damp and mouldy from infrequent laundering. The court physicians, all men in black robes, stand arrayed outside your chamber, tapping their wooden staffs and awaiting the signal to rush in. When the pains of labour strike, even a small complication, a ruptured uterus or hemorrhage, means the sole recourse is to pray, for there are no antibiotics, no blood transfusions, only crude surgical blades, and a desperate hope that God will intervene. After childbirth, you scarcely have time to recover. The moment your lochia begin to dry, Henry demands you resume marital relations so that you may conceive again. This cycle repeats endlessly until you collapse in that stifling chamber, or give birth to a son, though the risk of puerperal infection claims the lives of nearly half of all royal women. The cruelest irony is that, after all this physical and emotional agony, the memory of those deathly medical scenes is quickly erased by history. People only recall the final result, a prince or a sentence. The pain, the humiliation, and the image of exhausted queens emerging from their confinement chambers with permanently ravaged bodies exist now only as ghostly echoes in the silent corridors of Hampton Court, those Tudor shadows bearing witness to the ruthless cruelty of 16th century medicine. And when it comes to royal medical intervention, I mean the kinds of absurd conjectures that could kill you faster than the disease itself. If you suffer severe hemorrhaging during childbirth, the royal physicians are essentially powerless. 29, 28. No blood transfusions, no antibiotics, no emergency cesarean sections advances from the East or Italy have yet to arrive. Prayer thus becomes the official therapy, regarded as medically valid as any surgical procedure or pharmacopoeia. Jane Seymour, after delivering Prince Edward at Greenwich Palace, endured days of peritonitis. The infection spread throughout her body while the physicians stood helpless before her raging fevers, delirium, and endless agony. Even the most basic aspects of healthcare are fraught with peril. 2954. Tooth decay is a classless affliction, tormenting both Henry VIII and his queen with excruciating pain. The royal dentist's standard solution is to extract the tooth without anesthesia. You must grip a hard wooden chair and suppress your screams. Personal hygiene is virtually non-existent. Bathing is believed to throw open the pores, inviting disease. Instead, you are issued a linen cloth to wipe away sweat, and a change of linen undergarments considered clean by Tudor standards, though rarely laundered properly. The royal diet, while ostentatious, is a nutritional disaster. 30.21. At the banquet table, meat reigns supreme: beef, pork, venison, turkey. Vast quantities that the kitchens lack refrigeration to preserve. Half of the meat is often already decomposing when served, salted, smoked, or drenched in harsh spices to mask the stench. Vegetables are deemed peasant food, appearing only sparingly as garnish. Every main course concludes with strong wine or ale, because well and river water are suspected carriers of plague. The side effects. The royal digestive system constantly suffers from constipation, gout, and chronic gastrointestinal disorders. Epidemiological records note that over 3/4 of courtiers over the age of 30 were hospitalized for enteritis or gallstones. And beauty regimens? Even more terrifying than the diseases they aim to cure. 3115. The ideal noble complexion must be a wax-pale white. Tudor ladies, even queens, slather their faces with suze, a paste of white lead and vinegar, slowly poisoning themselves for the sake of fashion. To accentuate their lips, they apply vermilion lipstick made from mercury, each swipe delivering a latent dose of poison that leaves them weakened, trembling, and emaciated. Not to mention belladonna deadly nightshade extract dripped into the eyes to dilate the pupils, though the result is blurred vision and a racing heartbeat. To achieve a lofty forehead, they pluck their hairline back several inches with crude tweezers, often inviting scalp infections. The entire court pursues this ideal of beauty, unwittingly crafting a long series of tragedies known as Tudor medicine. So if you're curious how luxurious life as a queen truly is, remember that behind the layers of velvet and sparkling jewels lie medical horrors capable of destroying body and spirit, leaving haunting memories that echo to this very day. If you were fortunate enough to become pregnant and unlucky enough to suffer from morning sickness, the treatment at court will make you gasp. The royal physicians will prescribe potions laced with arsenic, mercury, or lead, promising to soothe the queasy stomach of a noble lady. These three poisons appear not only in anti-nausea mixtures, but also in dozens of tonics purported to cure everything from melancholia to menstrual disorders. Imagine Catherine of Aragon enduring year after year of miscarriages and premature births. Each pregnancy brings a new medical breakthrough. Secret herbal formulas, massive doses of concoctions, protracted prayer rituals, and draconian dietary restrictions. All prove useless, and many do more harm than good, such as when she is given tea brewed from deadly nightshade leaves to balance the 5 organs, in the hope of saving her unborn child. When Anne Boleyn miscarried a male fetus in her final pregnancy, she fared no better. The physicians administered various herbal wines, and likely performed multiple bloodlettings to restore the womb. All the while, Henry was plotting her removal from the royal bedchamber. Even Catherine Parr, the last wife to survive Henry, could not escape medical tragedy. After remarrying and bearing a child, she contracted primary pearl fever, a vague term for puerperal infection. The court physicians intervened hastily with crude incisions and unsterilized instruments, their hands blackened by soot in the gloomy birthing chamber. Within days, she succumbed to the infection. The cruel irony is that royal medicine, though cloaked in academic prestige, often proved more lethal than the folk remedies of commoners. Villagers harvested willow bark, which contains a substance akin to aspirin, to relieve pain, and used primitive fermented molds as a form of antibiotic no certificates required, yet sometimes life-saving. Meanwhile, the court physicians clung to the doctrines of Galen and Hippocrates, dismissing empirical knowledge as rustic and unworthy of the palace. Thus, as you navigate courtly intrigues, strive to conceive, and placate Henry's unpredictable temper, you must also endure a medical service steeped in toxins. The white lead makeup on your face slowly poisons your bones. Each bloodletting weakens your body further, and when the day of delivery draws near, you are confined to the lying-in chamber, a place that would horrify even a modern veterinary surgeon to face the most brutal survival challenge any Tudor queen could know. Tudor court medicine was always a double-edged sword, with treatments often more perilous than the illnesses themselves. We have explored the horrific physical dangers of being Henry VIII's wife, from childbirth complications and the executioner's blade to medical care that could shorten your life. Yet perhaps the most enduring threat was the psychological torture of living each day under a tyrannical king. It was a deliberate, slow shattering of the spirit that would make modern psychologists recoil. From the very moment you ascended the throne, the warning siren never ceased. One misstep, one ill-chosen whisper, one flicker of dissatisfaction in your expression, and your entire world could collapse. Imagine waking each morning haunted by the knowledge that your husband holds actual power of life and death over you, not merely in theory but in brutal reality, as demonstrated by the fates of wives such as Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard. The psychological manipulation never stopped. One day, Henry might kneel before you, presenting a string of pearls and declaring, "My heart belongs only to you." The next, he would ignore you as if you were a stranger, without so much as an explanation. He would praise your virtue before the court, then whisper to his advisers, "I fear she harbours some dark secret." He would proclaim undying love in public, even as his gaze lingered on another face in the galleries. With Catherine of Aragon, Henry spent years insisting that their marriage was cursed by God. "You were once betrothed to my father," a charge directly contradicting the very union he had eagerly entered and maintained for nearly 2 decades. He forced Catherine to appear before a public court, swearing on her immortal soul that her first marriage had never been consummated, compelling her to stand in courtly robes as if she were an accused criminal. Meanwhile, Anne Boleyn, pursued by Henry for 7 years, was suddenly labelled the witch who poisoned the court, simply because she failed to produce a male heir. He instructed his courtiers to spread rumours of 6 fingers on her hand and a witch's mark on her neck, erasing every contribution she had made to the realm. Catherine Howard, a young and innocent girl, was not spared. Her past relationships were distorted into evidence of adultery. Without proper investigation, she was led to the execution block with no real chance to defend herself. Psychological torture extended to absolute isolation. You could not express homesickness, confide in any lady-in-waiting, any complaint could be used as evidence against you. You could not seek advice from your parents or friends, nor contact anyone outside the palace, for your letters were censored. And so, even when you forced a smile among the assembled guests, your heart raced. Every gesture, every word was watched by dozens of eyes, recorded in the court's secret registers, and wielded as a weapon by Henry to keep you in line. This was the most insidious form of psychological torture, turning you into a perpetual pawn, held in constant fear beneath the absolute power of the king. Under the grand chandeliers of Hampton Court, you were no longer a living person. You were a trembling shadow, ever awaiting the executioner's axe or the merciless glance of your sovereign. For Anne Boleyn, the psychological torture was even more subtle and cruel, staged like a deceitful play. After 7 years of Henry's relentless pursuit from Dover to Greenwich, once she failed to produce him a prince, he abruptly reversed course. The entire court became stifling. Courtiers whispered through the great hall, and the royal dining chamber echoed with mocking laughter. Henry began to humiliate Anne publicly by declaring that he could only love another, flagrantly courting Jane Seymour right before her eyes. When Anne dared to question the king's fidelity, he manipulated her psychologically, insisting she was delusional and irrational. After Anne miscarried a male fetus, a loss that broke countless hearts, Henry proclaimed it a sign that God did not bless their marriage, ruthlessly erasing every effort he had made to shatter the Roman alliance and bring her into the palace. Catherine Howard, a girl newly turned 17, was no less ensnared in this nightmare. When her youthful romances at home were revealed, she was forbidden to leave her chamber, left to hear rumours of her impending doom without any official word. Day after day, Catherine could only skirt wary glances and await the grim news. When she attempted to plead for a meeting with Henry to beg for mercy, royal guards stormed in and dragged her away, her screams echoing down the damp stone corridors of Hampton Court, while the king attended Mass at St. George's Chapel. Even Catherine Parr, the final queen to survive Henry, was caught in his savage psychological games. When she publicly supported Protestant clergy and published her works, the conservative faction at court convinced Henry that she was a political threat. He signed an arrest warrant for her confinement at Hampton Court, only to reverse himself at the last moment, declaring it a test of her loyalty, a cruel game in which her life dangled by the thinnest of threads. Isolation was another form of psychological torture every queen endured. As queen, you were never truly alone, yet you could trust no one. Your ladies-in-waiting recorded every whispered word, passing notes in secret while keeping their own diaries to report to the council. Those who heard your confessions could be interrogated, questioned, and ultimately turned into witnesses against you. Letters you wrote to your family or prayers uttered in confidence were intercepted and used as evidence of treasonous intent or discontent with the crown. Even your closest allies, witnessing Henry wielding his anger as a weapon, could and often did betray you to save themselves. A single misplaced glance, a moment's hesitation, was enough to spark poisonous rumours, giving grounds to strip you of titles or depose you entirely. In the Tudor world, there was no room for weakness or hidden pain. Every part of you, your beliefs, your memories, your very emotions could be twisted into instruments of control, keeping you in perpetual vigilance, even before those you thought were closest. Catherine of Aragon endured inconsolable grief when she was deprived of all contact with her daughter Mary, despite both mother and child's desperate pleas for one last meeting. When Henry declared their 8-year marriage null and void, she was forced to leave Whitehall Palace, stripped of her title as queen and relegated to the rank of Dowager Princess. Living in exile amid the damp castles along the Thames, Hampton Court, once echoing with Mary's calls of "Mother," now stood silent, its corridors redolent of fading blossoms and the midnight cheer of crickets, bearing witness to a cruel and tearful separation. Anne Boleyn, after 3 years as queen, likewise suffered relentless isolation. Once out of favour, she was cut off from her Howard kin, who dared not approach and lived under the unblinking watch of royal guards. Every sumptuous gown she wore was scrutinised for the slightest flaw, and she could not conceal her trembling as she stepped into the Queen's chapel for services. Catherine Howard, barely beyond her 17th year, faced near-total disenfranchisement. When her teenage love affairs were exposed, she lost not only her honour, but even the right to confess privately to a priest. In her final hours, instead of a discreet absolution, she was compelled to kneel on the cold stone floor of the Tower of London, hands shaking, before a troop of swordsmen, an execution more harrowing than any whispered penance. Anne of Cleves, though spared the block, endured public humiliation from the moment she entered the palace gates. The royal painter was punished for depicting her too attractively, courtiers whispered about her plain gowns, and laughter rippled through banquet halls. The palace became a carnival of derision, ladies-in-waiting trading barbs in hushed tones, guests betting on how long before she was stripped of rank and discarded. Ironically, even as the only queen Henry chose to spare, bestowing on her the title his beloved sister, Anne remained under strict isolation. She was summoned to court only twice a year, for precisely 3 days each visit, before retreating to her private estates, where only the wind whispering down empty corridors and the flicker of fireflies at her windows broke the silence. Above all, the most terrifying decree was that no queen could shed a single tear. They were compelled to maintain an aura of imperial dignity, so that all eyes saw was the splendour of velvet and jewels, not the scars upon their souls. Catherine of Aragon could not collapse in sobs at her annulment ceremony. Anne Boleyn could not raise her voice to plead her innocence at her public trial. Catherine Howard could not cry out once for mercy. Anne of Cleves could not betray the slightest mortification. Jane Seymour could not lament her exhaustion in childbirth. Catherine Parr could not tremble, even when her very freedom hung in the balance. Whenever a queen dared sigh or allowed her eyes to betray fear, that moment was recorded in the court's secret ledger, repurposed as evidence of discontent or disloyalty. In the Tudor world, silent endurance was more perilous than open defiance, for only by absolute silence could a queen hope to preserve both her body and the fragile remnants of her dignity. For Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn, their indomitable wills have become the stuff of legend. Catherine, after 24 years as queen, stood firm in defence of her honour and her faith until her dying breath, despite relentless isolation and suffering. Anne, having endured years of slander and character assassination, maintained her dignity to the very end, even when she knew her fate was sealed. They are icons of inner strength, rarely matched in royal history, inspiring awe across generations. By contrast, Catherine Howard's ordeal exemplifies the crushing psychological pressure that a young woman could face. Witnesses recall that on the eve of her execution she sat trembling by a block of wood, practicing laying her head on the chopping stump, her eyes hollow and her lips quivering. That image, a frightened girl struggling to comprehend her imminent death, haunted the entire court and even the hardest-hearted chroniclers. All the more perverse, Tudor society expected these queens to be grateful for the honour of marrying the king, regardless of the humiliation and cruelty they endured. Whether divorced, confined, or beheaded, they had to smile, bow, and demonstrate unwavering loyalty. Complaints or expressions of pain amounted to treason. Happiness or misery, they were to give thanks simply for having been chosen an honour that shackled their spirits. In truth, this psychological torment was not random cruelty, but a calculated strategy of Henry VIII. He understood that breaking a woman's will was more effective than any sword or sentence. By keeping his wives in a state of constant anxiety, isolation, and uncertainty, he maintained absolute power. They woke each day fearing surveillance, walked a tightrope when they appeared in public, and heard whispers hinting at their instability. The physical wounds, executions, traumatic labours, postpartum infections are well documented in the annals. But the mental scars these queens carried were even more savage. They feared not only for their lives, but for the loss of themselves. Their self-worth, their perceptions, their memories, even their grasp on reality were subject to manipulation. Panic attacks amid lavish banquets, furtive tears when no one was looking, the unrelenting dread of an uncertain future. All these constitute a silent battle that no history book can fully capture. Imagine Catherine of Aragon, once a ruling queen, forced to endure the murmur of treason every time she opened her mouth. Or Anne Boleyn, celebrated as a symbol of reform, suddenly branded a witch simply because she failed to produce a son. Isolation was not merely a legal reality, but a psychological one. You could stand in a crowd, but you had no true ally. Your ladies-in-waiting, your courtiers, even your parents became cogs in the surveillance machine. It was this merciless system wielded as royal policy that produced the most harrowing psychological warfare any Tudor woman could face. No battlefield, no courtroom, only invisible lines carved deep into the mind, eroding trust, distorting memory, and causing her to question even her own sanity. In her final days, she did not merely fight for life, she fought to preserve her very self. And that, perhaps more than any beheading or battlefield, is the unforgettable nightmare endured by those who bore the title Queen of Henry VIII. If you are fortunate enough to survive Henry's wrath, whether by the arduous path of divorce like Catherine of Aragon or Anne of Cleves, or by outliving him like Catherine Parr, you might imagine you have won your freedom. In reality, your trials are only beginning. The life of a former Tudor queen, once she leaves the throne, is haunted by shadows and challenges as harrowing as those she endured as queen. You are no longer an ordinary subject, yet you are no longer the king's wife. You find yourself suspended in a strange limbo between honour and erasure. Imagine Catherine of Aragon, who once presided over majestic Whitehall, suddenly rechristened Princess Dowager, a humiliating title she steadfastly refused to recognise, despite the court's formal decrees and her daughter Mary's desperate entreaties. After 24 years as queen, she was banished from one damp riverside castle to another, First the desolate halls of Sutton Courtenay, then the isolated corridors of Woodstock, and finally the frigid ramparts of Alnwick. Each fortress barred by locked gates and patrolled by watchful guards, her comforts dwindled to draughty rooms and meagre sustenance, while every letter she sent home was seized or censored. She was forbidden any meeting with Mary. Both mother and daughter's pleas went unheard, shattering their bond. Anne of Cleves fared little better. Dubbed the King's beloved sister, she was only permitted to return to Hampton Court twice a year, each visit lasting a mere 3 days. During those brief stays, she sat silently beneath the scrutinizing stares of courtiers, whose whispered criticisms of her simple attire and unfashionable hairstyles chased her back to her lonely thatched house in Richmond, where only the chirp of cicadas and the creaking gate greeted her. Catherine Parr, granted freedom after Henry's death, might have hoped for lasting peace, yet even within her elegant Tudor home in Chelsea, she found herself under constant psychological siege. Every letter she penned was vetted by her secretaries. Gatherings with old friends quickly morphed into interrogations over her religious sympathies. She could not escape the echo of furtive footsteps in the corridor outside her chamber as crown guards passed by. For any ex-queen, the greatest terror is not death, but the dread of being forgotten or permanently defamed. Folklore remembers Catherine of Aragon as the obstinate queen, and Anne Boleyn as the beheaded witch, even though their service and suffering are never fully recounted. Jane Seymour is recalled as the mother of the prince, yet few grasp the agony she endured in her cramped confinement chamber, where the only sounds were her cries and the distant clip-clop of hooves. In the end, your legacy becomes a fleeting dance on Henry's courtly stage. Some are expunged, others are scoffed at, a few are preserved like jeweled curiosities. Yet every step you take, whether through divorce or survival, leaves a silent imprint on the empty corridors where Tudor shadows linger, watching your every breath, denying you any escape from the royal past etched indelibly into history. Anne of Cleves was perhaps the luckiest of Henry's wives, in that she escaped a bloody divorce and the stigma of execution, yet she was still forced to live in a strange half-world, both favoured and shunned. Once Henry VIII tired of her lifeless appearance at their formal meeting, he promptly bestowed upon her the title beloved sister of the king, granted her 3 magnificent castles along the River Thames, and awarded her an annual income of £1,000, a staggering sum in the Tudor era, equivalent to the lifetime earnings of a middling noble. Yet this very splendour bound her in invisible chains, condemning her to a liminal status, exalted, yet utterly isolated. Imagine her stepping onto the cold flagstones of Hampton Court, the atmosphere both solemn and stifling as courtiers whisper about her unconsummated marriage. They mockingly dubbed her the Mayor of Flanders, sneering that the diplomatic portrait was mere flattery. Royal paintings once hanging in the Great Hall were swiftly replaced. The court painter was accused of sycophancy when his likeness left Henry feeling dazed. Ungren. Despite her wealth, Anne was denied the possibility of a second marriage. In a society where a woman's status was measured by her wedding ring and courtly whispers, no one would marry the king's sister, who had been the centerpiece of a European diplomatic stunt. Her English never progressed beyond a few basic phrases. She could not join in conversation at grand banquets, and her afternoons in the Fenton Fall Gardens were accompanied only by cicadas and the lonely shadow beneath an ancient oak. She outlived Henry and all his previous wives, yet those years passed in a peculiar suspension, wealthy but purposeless, titled but adrift. Occasionally she invited foreign friends for discussions on European politics, but they were more eager to hear her unique divorce secrets than to form genuine friendship. A letter filled with motherly affection that she sent to Mary Tudor was read only through a barred gate and then torn to shreds. For Catherine Parr, post-Henry life seemed at first a blessed release. She remarried for love to Thomas Seymour and enjoyed peaceful days at her Tudor manor in Chelsea, where Flemish tapestries adorned the walls and a French rose garden drank in the sunlight. But happiness was fleeting. Only 1 year after Henry's funeral, she became pregnant and then died from childbirth complications, leaving behind 3 small children and her unfinished book, the Book of Devotion. The king's children by his wives each faced their own trials. Mary Tudor, daughter of Catherine of Aragon, was declared illegitimate when her mother was deposed, forced into service in her half-sister Elizabeth's household, and forbidden all contact with the mother she desperately missed. Elizabeth, marked as Anne Boleyn's child, grew up in fear of even uttering her mother's name, learning silence in a court rife with intrigue. Elizabeth I, daughter of Anne Boleyn, was born on a crisp autumn morning at Greenwich Palace, yet from her very first breaths she lived under the shadow of a bloody past. Forbidden ever to speak her mother's name, Elizabeth I grew up wandering silent corridors, where the whispers of courtiers and attendants cut into her tender heart like blades. Her mother, once a symbol of reform and ambition, was executed before Elizabeth I could even know her, and that legacy became an invisible shackle upon the Queen's life. After Anne Boleyn's death, Elizabeth I was removed from the centre of power and sent to live in the small court at Hatfield House, where vast gardens reached out under golden skies. Yet her spirit darkened, not only for the loss of her mother, but also for the subtle prejudice of the realm. As the daughter of one condemned as a witch and a traitor, Elizabeth I had to conceal her lineage whenever she entered the Great Hall. Every gown she wore, every word she spoke, every gesture she made was scrutinized. A stray glance or an ill-timed smile could be taken as defiance of the throne. The impact of that earlier tragedy did not end with Elizabeth I, but echoed through 2 generations. When her half-sister Mary ascended the throne, Mary I unleashed a campaign of religious persecution so savage she became known to history as Bloody Mary. It was said that Mary I bitterly resented having been forced to renounce the Catholic faith under courtly pressure, and that bitterness drove her to mercilessly punish any who refused conformity. Elizabeth I watched beloved friends fall for the crime of heresy and learned that power spares no one deemed weak. Mary I even stripped Elizabeth I of her rights, confining her to a series of remote palaces, attended by only a handful of loyal ladies in waiting. Yet within that isolation, Elizabeth I found inner strength. She devoted herself to study, mastering French and Italian, devouring Roman history and Greek literature. Every volume she read echoed with her mother's unspoken hopes, treatises of Reformation faith and the humanist learning Anne Boleyn had cherished. Born a political pawn like all of Henry VIII's wives, Elizabeth I wrenched control of her own destiny, transforming her pain into power. She famously declared that she would have 1 God and 3 crowns, England, France and Ireland, and no other husband. That proclamation was more than a refusal of royal marriage. It was Elizabeth I championing personal liberty, the hard-won fruit of her earlier horrors. Yet surviving physically did not mean escaping harm. Elizabeth I's reputation, relationships, and place in Tudor society were forever shaped by her father's marital storms. She quickly realized her most dangerous adversaries were not only Henry VIII or Mary I, but the court itself, a piranha tank of ambitious nobles, scheming advisors, and rival factions eager to use or destroy anyone in their path. From Archbishop Cranmer to the Duke of Norfolk, every face might offer praise one moment and plot removal the next. From the instant she was named heir apparent, Elizabeth I became both target and instrument, a prize for factions to battle over, a tool to secure or shift the crown. Every word, even a playful jest or a flattering compliment, was recorded in the Privy Council's confidential ledger as evidence of discontent or disloyalty. Through that whirlpool of intrigue, Elizabeth I built for herself an inner realm, steadier than any physical throne, sustained by intelligence, perseverance, and a yearning for freedom, qualities her mother, Anne Boleyn, had only begun to instill. And so her true legacy emerges. Not simply Elizabeth I, the lifelong queen, but the living embodiment of resilience rising from darkness, binding 2 generations of Tudor queens into an enduring memory of courage and tenacity. If you were Catherine of Aragon, from the moment Henry VIII rejected you, you became the emblem of the old Catholic faction. The conservative nobles, the Dominican friars, and the great Spanish families who still bowed before the English crown rallied to your side. They lauded your virtue, endlessly repeated your 24 years of marital fidelity, and raised you up as a banner of resistance against the Roman Church. Yet not one of them truly cared about you as a person. Your failing health, the emptiness you felt when motherhood was torn from you, or the humiliation you suffered each moment you were banished from Whitehall to the damp castles along the River Thames. By contrast, if you were Anne Boleyn, From the very first time you appeared before Henry VIII, you became the standard bearer of the reformers. Young scholars in Cambridge gown, Oxford tutors, even members of the nascent Anglican hierarchy proclaimed you their champion, portraying you as a modern woman daring to defy papal authority. They circulated rumours of your secret Protestant leanings in coded letters. Yet the moment you pressed into policy, criticising Thomas Cromwell's land seizure schemes, or demanding that church property be redistributed, those same allies turned their backs, quietly cutting deals with Cromwell to orchestrate your downfall. If you were Jane Seymour, whose marriage to Henry momentarily healed the religious rift, both reformers and conservatives alike hailed you as the stable queen. They cheered the birth of Edward, the long-desired male heir, flooding you with praise. Yet those who once applauded were ready to replace you the moment another bride seemed more advantageous, and when you succumbed to postnatal fever, their mourning was as brief as their loyalty had been. Consider Thomas Cromwell himself, the architect of the Reformation under Henry. He first championed Anne Boleyn because her support for confiscating church lands advanced his own vision of a sovereign church. They built the schism together, but when Anne dared to criticise his policy, insisting that he redistribute ecclesiastical estates to a new class of nobles, Cromwell felt his power threatened. In a matter of weeks, he assembled fabricated confessions, distorted testimonies, and paid witnesses, condemning Anne to a tragic end. The Howard family provides another sobering example. After Anne Boleyn was deposed, the venerable Duke of Norfolk hurriedly arranged his granddaughter Catherine Howard's marriage to Henry, convinced her youth and beauty would restore the family's standing. But when Catherine's youthful indiscretions emerged before the wedding, the Howards offered no counsel, no warning about the deadly game of court politics. A 17-year-old girl was led to the scaffold, and the Howard name was buried under public disgrace. And it did not end there. Any lady in waiting in the royal household, any loyal courtier, might serve as a spy for one faction or another. Whispered confidences in your dressing chamber, your fatigue, your anxieties over pregnancy were dutifully recorded. Those reports became secret petitions to the King's Council, accusing you of weak health, to pave the way for someone more pliable. Even your menstrual cycle, a sign of reproductive fitness, was dissected in Privy Council meetings, used as justification for criticism or deposition. You were a mere pawn on a vast chessboard, where every step, every glance, every smile was read, analysed, and exploited for schemes of power. Few who stood beside you did so out of loyalty. They used your image and title to fuel their own ambition, and when you outlived your usefulness, they turned away, leaving you to endure loneliness, shame, or even exile and death. In the Tudor world, the highest rank is little more than a curse, and you, once the king's wife, could be cast into the abyss of political intrigue at any moment. If you are fortunate enough to become pregnant beneath the Tudor court's vaulted ceilings, you simultaneously become the target of an entire flock of power-hungry vultures. They circle you, eyes fixed on every heartbeat and every curve of your belly. A son growing within you is heralded as the hope of the throne, yet it also ignites terror among rival factions. If this prince lives, the influence of House A or Party B may be undermined. Conversely, should you bear a daughter or suffer a miscarriage, rumours tumble through the palace like a gale, signalling that the Queen's favour may be waning. And of course, no one allows you to keep this sacred matter to yourself. Your unborn child becomes a political pawn, fodder for whispered conversations at banquets and for secret counsel with clerics or privy councillors. Religious schism only amplifies the stakes. When Henry severed ties with Rome to found the Church of England, then oscillated between conservative and reformist policies, each of his queens, whether it was Catherine of Aragon with her steadfast Catholic devotion, Anne Boleyn, championing Protestant ideas, Jane Seymour's moderate counsel, or Catherine Parr's measured tolerance, was exploited by one faction or another. You will hear that the conservatives allege Catherine concealed her Catholic baptism, while reformers loudly praise Anne for her embrace of the gospel. Every flutter of life in your womb is seized upon for the relentless power struggle. And do not imagine it ends with idle gossip. Royal gifts are part of the intricate scheme. You will be presented with lustrous pearl necklaces, jade bracelets, and gold-embroidered cloaks. Yet behind their splendour lies intent. A collar so heavy it disrupts your gait, or an outdated French-style hairpin implying you cannot keep pace with English fashions. A beloved lady-in-waiting may suddenly be promoted to your personal secretary. But is she loyal, or simply eager to eavesdrop and collect secrets for her patron faction? Even the sumptuous feasts placed before you may be tweaked to offend your supposed enemies. The exotic spiced fish once served to Anne of Cleves became the subject of court jests. She does not understand English cuisine, sparking immediate rumours that she could not assimilate. In such circumstances, neutrality is impossible. To be deemed too aloof makes you a target. She does not support us, they whisper, and you are branded indecisive. Should you dare voice an opinion, the opposition will denounce you for meddling in politics, a realm in which a queen must never involve herself. To abstain is to be deemed useless. To engage is to invite attack. This queen only weighs advantage. They'll sneer. Only Anne Boleyn, with her steely resolve, managed to forge a formidable support network from young reformers like Cranmer at Oxford to patriotic youths at Arundel's court and progressive nobles such as Robert Dudley. Thus, though she failed to produce a male heir for 5 years, she retained her throne for a time. But lose even one ally, or reveal one weakness, and the vultures descend in an instant. So, pregnancy under Henry VIII was not simply a matter of motherhood. It was your entry into a monumental political chess game, where every bodily gesture a strand of hair swept aside. A tender sigh could be dissected for advantage. You may imagine you hide in a private chamber, but in the Tudor world, even the sound of your heart beating can be observed, analysed, and exploited. And when one faction loses ground, they discard you like a spent scrap of parchment. Catherine Howard, barely over her 20th year, stepped into the Tudor court with wide, innocent eyes and a heart full of dreams. Yet lacking both political savvy and experience, she lasted fewer than 2 autumns as Henry VIII's queen. Courtiers whispered of her youthful indiscretions. Conservatives lurked in the shadows, ready to twist any hint of impropriety into grounds for disgrace, and chances to redeem herself were as rare as a rose blooming in winter's chill. Meanwhile, Catherine Parr, intelligent, well-read, and eloquent, came perilously close to ruin under the relentless pressure of religious hardliners who nearly convinced the king that she was an extremely dangerous radical. A stray rumour, a privately circulated book discovered out of turn, and she might well have shared Anne Boleyn's tragic fate. Imagine yourself in such a position. You must conceive a royal heir, oversee daily court ceremonies, flatter a husband growing ever more capricious, all while navigating a labyrinth of political landmines scattered along the palace corridors. Every gesture, even the way you place a teacup on its saucer, can be misconstrued as an act of malice. Every polite conversation, a honeyed trap. The friendliest face may conceal an agent of a rival faction, and the slightest shift in court policy, say, the appointment of a new minister, can elevate you to the pinnacle of favour or cast you into the depths of ignominy. Court politics under the Tudors functioned like a piranha tank, smooth-talking, opportunists wearing masks of loyalty, waiting for you to falter before striking. Yesterday's ally can become tomorrow's foe in an instant. In that climate, being queen was not only an honour but a form of psychological, political, and even physical torture, because even the most mundane aspects of daily life held hidden dangers. Consider royal fashion. Tudor beauty standards demanded not merely splendour but deadly sacrifice. An ideal queen was expected to have ivory white skin, ruby red lips, a high forehead, and an hourglass figure, all achieved through brutal body-shaping garments. First came the rigid corset, stiffened with steel and wood, which flattened the bust and cinched the waist so tightly that you could breathe at only 50% capacity. Next, the farthingale, a hoop skirt framed with wooden hoops or whale baleen to create a dramatic bell shape, forcing you into an erect, formal posture with every step. Finally, a lavish outer gown of velvet or opulent brocade, embroidered with gleaming gold thread and studded with shimmering pearls, often weighing tens of pounds and obliging you to balance painfully on aching feet. Each ensemble was less clothing than a device of torment. Maids gasped for breath as they laced you into your corset. The farthingale turned every movement into a trial, and the heavy velvet layers stifled any hint of fresh air, ramping up the stifling heat in already oppressive rooms. By night, you tossed and turned, sweat soaking your nape, haunted by the knowledge that dawn would bring the next ordeal of strapping into your silk armor for a day of public display. And amid all those ironclad shackles, you remained a fragile symbol of power, resplendent outwardly, remorseless inwardly, ever on the brink of collapse at a thoughtless glance or a whispered conspiracy from those lusting after the throne. Have you ever wondered just how heavy that ornate brocade gown you don each morning really is? In the Tudor court, a full-length royal dress was not only a symbol of luxury, but could weigh as much as 15 pounds, equivalent to carrying a medium-sized hound on your back all day, through the drafty stone corridors and breezes rolling off the Thames. Every step you took across the Great Hall became an ordeal. The weight of the skirt pressed into your pelvis, constricted your breathing, and gouged deep bruises into your muscles, leaving your skin mottled by evening's end. Yet the most insidious enemy hid in your painstakingly applied makeup. That milky white complexion, an emblem of exalted rank, came courtesy of Suze, a paste of white lead boiled in vinegar. Each application infused tiny lead particles into your skin, where they built up, ravaging your nervous system. Hair fell in clumps, muscles grew weak, and over time fatal lead poisoning could strike. Both Anne Boleyn and Elizabeth Tudor reportedly relied on Suze so heavily that only their later portraits skillfully masked the lead scars on their faces. And those perfect ruby lips? Vermilion lipstick contained mercury, swelling your mouth into an enticing pout. But month after month it sent you into tremors, memory loss, kidney failure, and gradual decline. Longed for wide, luminous eyes? A single drop of belladonna extract from the deadly nightshade plant would dilate your pupils to an almost otherworldly beauty under candlelight. In return, you risked blurred vision, racing heartbeat, and hallucinatory madness. Belladonna's nickname, Beautiful Lady, arose because so many women gambled their sight for the sake of allure. And that ideal high forehead revered in Tudor fashion required plucking your hairline back several inches. Each follicle tugged out was a jolt of agony that often wound into infection on the scalp. Eyebrows, too, were stripped away to 2 fine pencil lines, making your gaze appear innocent but wrecking natural oils, and leaving your delicate skin prone to irritation. But the cruelest implements were the corset and farthingale, a rigid steel-boned bodice that flattened your bust and cinched your waist so tightly your lungs could only half expand, forcing you to gasp for air, and an underskirt frame of wood or whalebone that flared your skirts into a gigantic bell, fixing your posture in every step. Crossing those stone-paved halls, you had to tiptoe, bracing each movement for grace, all while sweat soaked through your layers. By banquet time, the flicker of dozens of candles only highlighted the dust caked into your velvet, and the heat mingled with the perfume wafting from other court ladies into an almost suffocating haze. And when night finally fell, you lay in a cramped bedchamber, sheets soaked in scented oils, yet you still smelled the clinging fireplace smoke and musty damp of the walls. This, of course, is only a glimpse of life in the confinement chamber. Imagine combining these draconian fashions with the relentless pressure to preserve your rank, to avoid a single misstep, a too deep breath, an ill-timed smile, a fleeting frown. Every garment you donned was not merely a royal emblem, but a physical sentence, gnawing at your sinews, bones, and mind with each passing hour. In the Tudor world, brocade and silk were your gilded armor, concealing a brutality beneath, and you, the queen, were the lone warrior trapped within its glittering shell. The newest French-style hood, with its delicate veil and steel wire frame, proudly displays the long cascade of your hair and has become the court's latest fashion triumph. Although you favor the more modest, understated English hood, the moment you step into the Great Hall at Hampton Court, you must don the French bonnet, a symbol of the Parisian, exquisite style in which Henry VIII places such hope. Immediately afterward, you must step into the Spanish farthingale, cinched tightly at the waist but flaring out to an almost absurd breadth, sometimes reaching a diameter of 6 feet, forcing you to stoop and waddle through the thick velvet drapes that seal off the cold. Every time you move from the east wing to the west wing, it feels as though you are bearing a wooden cage around your hips, navigating narrow, echoing corridors while avoiding candle sconces and carved reliefs. Dressing as queen is nothing like dressing yourself today. Your ladies of the bedchamber, usually 6 attendants trained for weeks, perform the elaborate mantling ritual, first lacing your rigid corset, then layering your undergarments, tightening the farthingale, and finally hooking on the great gown. Each gesture is accompanied by soft music and flickering candlelight, yet offers no privacy. Every adjustment is watched, even recorded in the court's private register, to ensure you meet royal standards. Even your nightgown is far from comforting. It is a linen shift stiffened to maintain shape, with an embroidered lace collar and a skirt long enough to brush your ankles. You cannot sleep naked or in a flimsy gown. Instead, you endure night after night of constricting layers that leave you tossing, sweating, and turning, especially when the hearth grows cold and drafts slip through the window cracks. In winter, the weight and layers at least provide warmth, staving off shivers during frosty ceremonies. But in summer, within damp stone walls, and beneath the glare reflecting off the Thames, they become a torturous prison of fabric. The very idea of a proper bath is deemed foolish. You are merely wiped down with a linen cloth scented with rose oil, and the combination of skin oils and trapped perspiration turns stifling, making the palace feel like a steam chamber. And if you are with child, the ordeal doubles. That rigid triangle panel at the front of your corset, a reinforced linen yoke fixed beneath your shoulder blades, crushes your bump day after day until the final hour, confining the royal offspring in a metal embrace. In the later months, you are moved into specially tailored pregnancy gowns, a supportive band under the bust and vertical swathes of fabric that hint at your widening hips while still emphasizing the smallest possible waist, all to announce to the court that you bear a sacred duty, the birth of a prince. After giving birth, you are afforded no rest. The court immediately expects you to reclaim your pre-pregnancy figure as if you had never carried a child. By Tudor standards, only a corset tightened to the point of suffocation will flatten your abdomen despite your body still healing from an incision and a torn perineum. Recall Jane Seymour, appearing in a sumptuous court gown only 12 days after birthing Prince Edward, her face pale from blood loss and stress, yet forced to smile before the assembled guests. Or Anne Boleyn, even after a miscarriage, compelled to wear a deep purple ceremonial robe that stretched her wound taut and caused it to bleed, while courtiers whispered of the frail health of the woman who had once embodied hopes of religious reform. It was not only the corset that tormented you. Your postpartum jewelry became instruments of torture as well. Diamond-set rings, each as heavy as a paperweight, chafed your fingers raw, engraving red grooves around each joint. Your hands, already exhausted from cradling an infant through the night, now bore the burden of dozens of precious rings. And each time you raised a glass in celebration, the metal scraping hollowly against your skin sent waves of pain up your arms. Your sleeves, the latest Tudor fashion, ballooned like butterfly wings, weighing down your shoulders so that your deltoid muscles strained to keep them aloft, as if you were carrying a vast swath of fabric through the palace's narrow corridors. And do not forget the necklaces, lavish gifts from the king, crafted from gold leaf and strung with pearls. They were so heavy they swung with their own momentum when you curtsied, filling the great hall with the clinking of metal upon metal. Each chain rubbed harshly against the delicate skin beneath your collarbones, leaving angry red marks and the sensation of being choked every time you inhaled deeply. The greatest peril, however, lay in the refusal to conform. Defy the dress code, and you risked being branded insolent to the throne and granting your enemies ammunition for public ridicule. Hesitate to lace up your corset, and they would whisper, "This queen does not know how to keep her shape." Opt for a shorter gown to ease your movements, and the gossip mongers would brand you scandalous. Catherine of Aragon was scorned as archaic for clinging to Spanish attire. Anne Boleyn was deemed presumptuous for adopting French silhouettes. Anne of Cleves was mocked for her coarse Germanic gowns. At the Tudor court, fashion was not mere clothing, it was weaponry, a bulwark or a trap. Thus, each morning you awoke haunted. On one side, the newborn child. On the other, a chest of garments, corset, farthingale, and opulent dresses, each piece a tightening knot at your spirit. As your ladies-in-waiting hurried to lace your shoes and secure your bodice, striving to conceal the bruises on your flesh, you could only pray that tomorrow you might breathe a little more freely, before donning that silken armor once more, to continue presenting yourself as the eternal symbol of power and of suffering. Cuisine, one of humanity's simplest pleasures, becomes a nightmare for a Tudor queen. The dining regimen at the court of Henry VIII is not merely an odd mixture of excess and deprivation, but a political tool, a display of power and wealth rather than nourishment. Imagine a lavish banquet in the Great Hall of Hampton Court Palace. There, you as queen sit elevated beside Henry, under flickering candlelight and upon Persian carpets lining the floor. Before you stretches a banquet table running like a river of dishes, up to 14 main courses, accompanied by dozens of appetizers, desserts, and pastries, all arranged in elaborate hierarchy, solely to demonstrate the boundless prosperity of the realm. Yet you displayed like a prized gem can scarcely eat. Your corset is laced so tightly that it reduces your lung capacity by half, forcing you to sip a thin spoonful of bland chicken broth or nibble a small piece of boiled fowl. The royal menu is a carnivore's panorama. Roasted beef, fragrant with herbs, venison with crackling skin, lamb steamed with savory spices, stewed rabbit, even peacock and swan dishes reserved for grand celebrations, sometimes served with feathers reattached after cooking for bizarre effect. And vegetables? The Tudors consider them peasant fare, mere decoration. A pale plate of boiled greens stands beside heavily spiced fish for balance, yet few dare sample them. Fruit appears only in season, but not for fresh eating. Peaches, pears and apples are candied in spiced syrup and baked into tarts, disguising their original sweet freshness. The nutritional outcome is disastrous. A diet overloaded with protein and saturated fats, yet dangerously deficient in vitamins and fiber. Court records note that more than 1/3 of noblewomen suffer gout from overindulgence in meat and wine, while kidney stones and digestive disorders such as bloating and indigestion become nearly universal by the time one reaches 20 years of age. Worse still, even your act of eating is a political performance. Every morsel you lift, even a wafer-thin slice of ham, is observed by courtiers. Rumours spread. They say the queen has lost her appetite, and immediately your enemies whisper that you are frail and incapable of bearing a prince. Should you dare to show distaste for a dish, for instance, tart-spiced plums, they accuse you of indecisiveness or poor judgment for health. For an apprentice queen, the act of dining becomes a tense obligation. You must feign delight at every feast, commend the cooks with smiling praise, and chastise anyone who dares mutter, "This poultry is dry." Neglecting the ritual of the golden chopsticks, decorative utensils reserved exclusively for the queen, is deemed disrespect to the throne. In the Tudor court, food is never merely sustenance, but a subtle instrument of control, controlling your health, manipulating opinion, and above all, containing your spirit. Each meal is a loyalty test, each bite a potential trap, and once your value to the court wanes, they will discard you as they would an empty platter. Henry VIII was not just a powerful monarch. He was also a victim of his own stubborn digestive system. Chronic constipation, relentless bloating, and perpetual indigestion made his temper volatile. One moment he was irritable, the next downright unpredictable. Imagine you as his queen, forced each day to present a graceful smile at court banquets, all the while worrying whether that fragrant roast chicken or crisped venison might trigger a violent reaction in the king's belly. It was an almost impossible task for any of his wives. Tudor court cuisine, opulent in appearance but potentially lethal from within, relied on medieval preservation methods. Layers of heavy salting, weeks, long smoking, pickling in vinegar, or drowning in pungent spices to mask spoilage. In the kitchens of Hampton Court, damp conditions, scant natural light, and rudimentary hygiene allowed bacteria to flourish. On average, 3 to 5 severe food poisoning outbreaks were recorded in the royal annals each quarter, and not even the queen herself could escape bouts of vomiting, acute diarrhea, or agonizing stomach cramps. Tudor recipes paid no heed to nutrition or safety. Dishes were often boiled to mush, stripping water-soluble vitamins entirely, then roasted directly over smouldering coals, generating polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons compounds, now known to be potent carcinogens. Even supposedly harmless desserts like baked fruit tarts were suspect. Fresh peaches, pears and apples were stewed in honeyed syrup, then coated with a lead-based glaze to maintain a porcelain-white finish, so that every sweet, sticky bite delivered a dose of slow-acting poison. For the queen, refusing any dish placed before her was more than impolite, it was a political offence. State banquets were theatrical displays of power, and a queen's eager appreciation of every serving of beef stew, Every slice of smoked ham, or every spoonful of rich seafood soup was taken as proof of her loyalty to the crown and to English custom. A single wince at a taste of venison steak, or neglecting even a sliver of pickled asparagus, whispered rumours through the court that Her Majesty has grown weary of the palace, soon blossoming into claims that she was too feeble to serve the realm. Even the king's own dishes were not free of peril. Though each plate was sampled by royal tasters for freshness, there were still occasions when tainted morsels slipped through overspiced meat that concealed spoilage, or long-stored smoked fish that gave off a faint ammonia odour. At the slightest sign of distress, Henry setting down his fork, his face-paling courtiers enacted a chilling ritual. The royal tasting ceremony would be replayed in miniature, with fruits and vegetables bathed in heavily salted brine to kill germs, then steeped in pungent vinegar and honey to mask any remaining stench. And after every feast, the corridors would echo with whispers of food poisoning, so is the Queen's stomach. They said it took only one dish of poorly cured goose liver to send the entire banquet into chaos. The faint tang of decay on the breath, the dread of sudden retching and diarrhea, these became constant burdens. In the Tudor world, even the simple joy of a meal became a deadly game. A queen risked her health and her throne with every bite. Was this plate truly a gift of abundance, or a poisoned token from ambitious courtiers? And if one faction fell out of favour, she could be discarded as swiftly as the uneaten dish they once praised. At the grand banquets held in the great hall of Hampton Court Palace, Anne of Cleves's awkwardness with cutlery and menu choices left Henry VIII not merely disappointed, but downright disgusted. Her title of the King's beloved sister had initially masked diplomatic hopes, but when Anne, born and raised in the tiny realm of Cleves, found herself confronted with tables laden solely with traditional English fare, she frequently fumbled over how to properly bite into a slice of roast venison. Presented with a steaming piece of roast chicken, she would meticulously peel off the scented skin at a painstakingly slow pace, while Henry, seated across from her, turned away in irritation. Even her wine drinking betrayed her foreign upbringing. Instead of sipping delicately to taste, Anne lifted the goblet to her lips and let the wine spill forth, prompting discreet sniffles around the table, and whispered remarks like, "She is unworthy to be Queen of England." In stark contrast to that clumsiness was Catherine Howard, barely in her early 20s, with an appetite so hearty that Henry was utterly captivated. Upon entering court, Catherine devoured nourishing chicken broths, crisp smoked ham, and buttery mashed potatoes with palpable delight. Henry presented her with a dragon-engraved silver spoon and praised her for eating with the gusto of a true commoner. Yet, as her favour waned, that very same boundless appetite was turned against her. Courtiers quietly murmured that Catherine is profligate, gluttonous, as if to underscore claims of her excess and lack of virtuous restraint. Pregnancy, once imagined as a time of radiant joy, became a relentless torment on her stomach. Tudor medical law, utterly ignorant of reproductive science, prescribed a bewildering array of diets to divine the unborn child's destiny. To bear a son, one was urged to sip mulled wine and gorge on sumptuous red meats. To bear a daughter, one was commanded to fast from grains and subsist on boiled fish and fresh fruit, though that fruit was improved by being roasted in spiced syrup to prevent decay. Unable to verify the baby's sex until birth, expectant queens often oscillated between feasts of beef fillet one day and smoked herring the next. And for morning sickness, they were ordered to drink pulverized eggshell mixed into wine or scalded burnt bread soaked in ale. The outcome? Nausea intensified to excruciating levels, and several queens faced miscarriage, partly from the prolonged malnutrition such helpful regimens induced. Even water brought its own perils. Tudor taps delivered foul, impure draughts, so at every banquet no one dared drain their goblets of water instead. They drank hearty ales or watered-down wines. Though you might imagine being pampered with royal fare, the feast itself was a political spectacle. Every bite of meat, every hurried sip of wine, was scrutinized to measure the Queen's loyalty. And drinking in moderation might be manageable, but at royal banquets that stretch for hours, sometimes even days, when the court holds festivals, intoxication is almost unavoidable. Imagine yourself, as the Queen, attending a grand feast in the great hall. The soft strains of the lute fill the air, A goblet of potent wine rests in your hand, and all the while you must navigate a tangled web of court politics, enemies slithering behind your back, allies with calculating glances, all waiting for you to slip and utter a single ill-considered word that could betray your loyalty to the throne. Around you, courtiers and foreign envoys whisper, "She's had too much already." And instantly your high seat feels perilously unstable, as if a single stern look from the king could topple you. Meanwhile, the religious calendar only complicates matters further. 5 days of fasting each week, meat strictly forbidden, fish served only on solemn feast days, and on days of absolution even the wine must be white or diluted sweet, an exacting dietary regimen that you, whether pregnant or nursing, are compelled to observe in full view of the realm. Suppose you are nursing a newborn and craving the rich succulence of roast chicken, but it happens to fall on a designated fast day of the Church of England you cannot refuse, for a whispered report by a servant will soon reach the king's ear. The Queen spurns the fast. Such criticism is not merely gossip. It can be twisted into sensational rumours that Her Majesty may be with child again, igniting fear throughout the court about the future regency. Or consider if you are allergic to pepper, a pungent spice once used to purge evil, and you decline a bowl of fiery peppered soup. That act will be interpreted as haughty refusal or rejection of English hospitality. Worse still, people will whisper that you are employing cunning postpartum slimming tactics, or even insinuate you are barren, threatening to undermine your position of power. In such an environment, every sip you take becomes a political gamble. A single too deep draught brands you as weak and unsteady. Yet if you merely taste, observers murmur that she cannot appreciate English customs. It is unfair, but it is the unspoken rule. Neutrality and privacy are luxuries you cannot afford. The battlefield of etiquette and alliance lies across the banquet table, poised to exploit any misstep. Moreover, within these slender cracks, life and death speculation takes root. Opponents may immediately question, on which fasting day is the Queen now? Is she using deprivation to stunt her vitality? A tactic meant to brand you as incapable of inheritance or less splendid than your predecessor. Loyal courtiers will swiftly stage a public debate. Every drop you drink is treated as a tacit pledge. Support our faction, or your adversaries will seize upon your excess to bring you low. Thus, drinking beneath the vaulted stone ceilings of Hampton Court is far more than a pleasure. It is another face of power, where every gulp carries a bitter undertone of calculation, and any hint of drunkenness can be recorded as evidence in the Tudor court's secret register. Catherine of Aragon's fondness for fresh oranges and brined olives, an exotic habit she brought from Toledo on the Mediterranean, was at first regarded by Henry VIII as a charming foreign flourish, a touch of refinement amid the all-too traditional English feast. The ladies in waiting would gleefully present small dishes of glossy black olives, salty and piquant, interspersed with bright golden oranges redolent of citrus oil, composing a warm palate against the cold stone walls of Hampton Court's great hall. Yet, when the royal marriage crisis unfurled, those very orange and olive platters became evidence of her stubbornness. She clings to Spanish ways, refusing to embrace English custom, whispered the hardline factions. By contrast, Anne Boleyn's French-inspired palate-crisp green salads dressed in light olive oil and delicate glasses of sparkling wine once astonished courtiers. She dines with the finesse of Parisian nobility, they lauded. But when she fell from Henry's favour, those same preferences were branded ostentatious, un-English, giving her opponents fresh cause to murmur. Anne values her own identity above her royal duty. For any Tudor queen, even slight weight gain or loss invites peril. Eat too little, and they suspect anorexia or a pious self-fasting quickly twisted into fanaticism, justifying the crown stripping away your childbearing rights. Overindulge, and you are deemed gluttonous, intemperate, unworthy of the title Queen. Whether a spoonful of thin chicken broth, a slice of roasted venison, or a single sweetmeat, every forkful is noted by the menu recording staff. The Tudor court's cuisine operates like a political chessboard. Palace cooks not only ensure freshness but adjust flavours to suit rival factions. A plate of marinated lemons and olives reflecting Spanish tastes can spark cries of, "She spurns English custom," while a mint leaf-studded cucumber salad, an apparent French flourish, earns accusations of being unfit to nourish the prince. True nourishment is secondary, sometimes forgotten, as the ultimate goal is to score political points before the king and his councillors. Marriage to Henry VIII is thus the most perilous roller coaster of religious politics. One day you are hailed as the harbinger of renewal in the realm. The next you are condemned as sacrilegious, stripped of favour, then rehabilitated by another lavish feast. In a world where food is wielded as political weaponry and the path to the throne is paved with indigestion and the terror of being trapped by prejudice, even humanity's simplest pleasure eating can become an inescapable nightmare. The reign of Henry VIII was a turbulent journey between faith and power, during which England swung from Roman Catholicism to a unique branch of Protestantism, and at times longed to return to its ancient roots. In that religious maelstrom, the queens became both embodiments of national belief and the scapegoats whenever the hinge of history was wrenched. When Henry married Catherine of Aragon, the realm still moved to the rhythm of the Roman liturgy, the Latin Mass echoing through the royal chapel, candlelight flickering across frescoes of the saints, and devout worshippers filing forward for communion. Catherine was not only queen, but also the kingdom's reluctant spiritual leader, required to attend at least 3 services each day, to fast on the feasts of the Holy Apostles, and to undertake an annual pilgrimage to Canterbury Cathedral. She baptized orphans, distributed bread to beggars, and never missed a public prayer. Yet, when Henry demanded their 24-year marriage be declared null so he could wed Anne Boleyn, religion suddenly became a battleground of smoke and fire. Catherine's steadfast Catholic faith, once the very foundation of the nation, was branded disobedience to the king. She refused to recognize the annulment decree, kept her crown perched proudly on her head, and lit candles in supplication for the Pope, prompting Henry to denounce her as a traitor. This tragedy unfolded not in days, but over 6 years. Debates before the Roman Curia, negotiations with Spanish ambassadors, and finally an act of Parliament, stripping her of her title, all because she would not relinquish the sacred bond of matrimony. With Anne Boleyn, the religious pendulum swung the other way. Her passion for the scriptures and prohibited reformist tracts had first enraptured Henry, making her the standard-bearer of the reformist faction. Anne journeyed to Rome with the mission of disentangling England from papal authority, called for the redistribution of monastic lands, and held public lectures on sola scriptura. By torchlight in the royal errantry, she preached to packed halls, drawing scholars from Oxford and Cambridge and enthralling young Londoners. But when she pressed too far into episcopal appointments and openly challenged Thomas Cromwell's policies, the old guard turned on her. Within weeks, coerced confessions, forged evidence, and manipulated witnesses branded her a heretic and ultimately led her to the scaffold. And yet Jane Seymour, who stood between those opposing tides, tried to soothe both sides with moderation. She nursed Henry through his illnesses, bore him the long-awaited prince, and appeared at court in a pure white gown, her countenance gentle. Even her balance could not quell the storm. The reformers suspected her of lingering loyalty to Rome, while the conservatives accused her of using the image of Mother of England to bolster Anne Boleyn's faction. Jane passed away only 12 days after giving birth, leaving a realm still reeling on its uncertain course. Jane Seymour embodied a breath of fresh air for courtly worship after the storms of reform and schism. When she stood beside Henry in her pure white vestments at the coronation mass, the entire great hall at Hampton Court seemed to blaze with candlelight. Latin continued to resound, but now accompanied by English hymns, blending ancient tradition with a new direction. Jane was neither a radical reformer nor a die-hard Roman loyalist. She was a gentle bridge, guiding the English church from its peak of independence back to ritual roots, preserving the nation's spiritual life without upheaval. By contrast, Catherine Howard, a young woman of barely 20, suddenly found herself a pawn in the religious conflict she scarcely understood. Every ceremonial goblet brought forth, every wafer on the paten, became a political signal. Catherine's innocence and her hope for mercy earned her whispers. "She knows not how to honour the Most High," they murmured, and one bold gesture during Vespers was enough for them to brand her blasphemous. Her naive gaze, adrift among robed prelates chanting their offices, left her standing in fearful silence as the bells tolled. Catherine Parr, however, was the most learned and theologically absorbed of all Henry's wives. She spent long afternoons in the royal library, poring over English translations of the scriptures, discoursing with Thomas Cranmer on doctrine and sola fide. Yet the moment she deftly steered Henry through a dispute over vestments or parish appointments, the conservative faction leapt to denounce the Queen too fervent in reform, likening her to a heretical threat, poised to seize the throne. On one memorable occasion in the council chamber, Catherine Parr nearly found herself imprisoned for a frank comment on abolishing Roman rights. Henry, torn between love and pressure from traditionalist clergy, declared, "Your zeal becomes not a queen," leaving her stunned into acquiescence. As queen consort, their personal convictions counted for little against Henry's shifting religious mandates. Every prayer was a performance. The chapel arranged in strict ritual order, prayer books, Latin or vernacular, displayed prominently on the altar, each detail scrutinized so as not to offend the king. Every cleric she patronized, every sermon she attended, was logged in the court's secret register as unusual religious conduct or suspected schism. Yet the cruelest aspect of Tudor religious policing lay in its brutality. Though Henry's wives escaped the flames afforded to lesser offenders, hundreds of dissenters, from nuns at Glastonbury Abbey to courageous reformers in London, were tortured, mutilated, hanged, and burned for worshipping heretics. The Queen lived under the constant dread that a single misstep, failing to genuflect in Latin or lingering too long in conversation with a reforming preacher, might mark her as traitorous and seal her doom. In the volatile climate of Henry's reign, Jane Seymour's measured moderation offered a fleeting stability. Catherine Howard's tender youth was crushed by ruthless factionalism. Catherine Parr's heroic scholarship nearly cost her freedom. Their stories reveal that in Tudor England, to be queen was to stand at the crossroads of faith and power, where every ritual embrace of piety could become the prelude to a public disgrace or worse. Ultimately, each queen's fate was determined not only by her own beliefs, but by the shifting religious wind that Henry VIII commanded with merciless authority. Every morning at dawn, and sometimes twice or thrice a day, you would rise from your gilded canopy to attend Mass in the royal chapel at Hampton Court. Imagine the long, candlelit nave, lined with frescoes of saints, the air thick with incense, as choristers in crimson cassocks intone the Latin Ordinary. As queen, you would be expected to process in full regalia heavy velvet cloak, dragging on the marble floor kneel at the high altar, and receive the host before returning to your throne-like seat beneath the vaulted ceiling. But these sacred rites were never free from political scrutiny. Every public prayer, every genuflection, every whispered petition for the king's health was watched by a cadre of more than a dozen courtiers, positioned like sentinels in the aisles. They listened for any faltering in your devotions, any hesitation that might betray insufficient enthusiasm, or worse, an impulse toward pernicious innovation. On feast days, All Saints, Easter, Christmas processions wound through the great hall and courtyards, with you bearing the silver monstrance before the assembled nobility. Yet each step you took, each sigh you breathed in prayer, could be logged in the secret register as evidence against you. Even in private, your piety was under inspection. Your personal Book of Hours, an ornate volume illustrated with the passion and the glory of God, was routinely examined by the king's chaplains. Should they find annotations in the margins, perhaps a note on a reformist homily you found inspiring, they could present those scribblings as proof of dangerous leanings. Confessions you made in confidence could be recounted by your confessor, lifted from the confessional box, and turned into damning testimony. When Catherine Parr shared an impromptu sermon with her chambermaids on justification by faith, her own religious tutors whispered of her radical nonconformity, and the transcripts of those conversations were later used to accuse her of undermining royal authority. Charitable works, too, were inseparable from doctrine. You would distribute alms at St. George's Chapel every fortnight, instructing the poor to pray for the king and queen. But if you chose to direct too much charity towards supposed popish institutions, the Protestant faction would whisper that you were secretly funding Rome's cause. Pilgrimages you undertook to Canterbury or Walsingham were celebrated as proof of devotion until the English Reformation cast those journeys as acts of treason. Catherine of Aragon faced this spiritual torment most acutely. Forced before the council to swear that Henry was supreme head of the Church of England, she who had spent decades as defender of the faith found her conscience rent. Her refusal echoed through the stone corridors, each echo a drumbeat of her defiance, yet also of the heresy with which her opponents charged her. For foreign-born queens, the shifting religious landscape was a perilous labyrinth. Anne of Cleves, raised in a Lutheran court, found herself bewildered by the alternating mandates. 1 month attending a rosary prayer for the Virgin, the next forbidden to venerate images under penalty of idolatry. Every devotional gesture crossing oneself, kissing a crucifix became a test. Too Roman, and you were branded papist. Too austere, and Puritan. All the sect. Living as Henry VIII's consort meant that your soul, or at least its reputation, hung in the balance each time you crossed the threshold of the chapel. The very act of worship could invoke heaven's favour, or satanic suspicion. For every prayer you offered for the king's health, there was a courtier ready to note whether your clasped hands veiled a heretical heart. And so the devotions that should have brought solace, instead, became another instrument of control. A relentless scrutiny that turned even your faith into the grimmest of political battlegrounds. Catherine of Aragon hailed from the fervently Catholic kingdom on the Iberian Peninsula, where the power of the Roman Church was enforced by the very sword of the Inquisition. Anne of Cleves, by contrast, was born in a German duchy where Luther's bells rang through every village, and reformers proclaimed sola scriptura, in place of lengthy liturgies. When both women arrived at Hampton Court, they were immediately swept into the whirlwind of an England torn from Rome, yet swept by a Protestant wind that howled through every chapel, a religious tempest in which a single misstep could spell catastrophe. Even motherhood ceased to be a purely sacred calling. Inside the palace, the question of how to raise a prince or princess became an ideological battlefield. Catherine of Aragon stubbornly insisted on her daughters studying from the Latin prayer books, teaching Mary to kneel before the altar and toll the chapel bell 3 times daily. Henry, however, demanded that Mary memorize the English Bible, receive Thomas Cranmer's sola fide sermons, and attend private lessons on the nature of the Saviour, signals that the court was prepared to abandon elaborate rituals in favour of the people's faith. Catherine Parr, Henry's 6th and final wife, would carry forward this legacy. She introduced Protestant tracts into Hampton Court's library, so that the young Princess Elizabeth could devour treatises on grace and faith. On summer afternoons, Elizabeth sat by her study window as Oxford scholars visited to lecture on the Old and New Testaments, sowing the seeds of the scholar-queen era she would one day inaugurate. Yet from solemn high masses to public processions, every ceremony became a political minefield. On Candlemas, when hundreds of beeswax candles illuminated the great hall, courtiers whispered, "Is there still a Roman glimmer in these rites?" At Christmas, choirs sang Latin carols, prompting reformers to mutter, "Why not sing in English for the common folk?" And at Easter, the elaborate parade of the resurrection icon was denounced as overly dogmatic, while anyone failing to attend, even lingering outside, risked being branded an extremist dissenter. However, caught between these opposing tides, the queens had to walk a razor's edge. Catherine of Aragon to prove her loyalty to Rome while feigning openness to the English clergy. Anne of Cleves to endure ridicule for rigidly observing Maundy Thursday in the German style, yet be honoured as the king's sister when she accepted the simplified English communion. And Jane Seymour, though taken too soon, fulfilled her role as mediator, appearing at Christmas in a pure white gown, intoning Latin prayers, then mere hours later singing English hymns in the private chapel, a beacon of reconciliation. Raising royal children in this climate was both a sacred duty and a perilous threat. Under Catherine's tutelage, Mary Tudor memorized Latin liturgies, only to be later constrained by Cromwell into learning the Our Father in English. Elizabeth, forbidden even to speak her mother's name, grew up with the Elizabethan Bible in her hands, ready at dusk to recite a prayer in the Queen's private oratory. And every time this Tudor child lit a candle in the chapel, she had to ensure that not only her soul but her very voice remained in perfect harmony with the shifting policy of the realm. Thus, the reign of Henry VIII became a journey on the razor's edge of faith and power, where England veered from Roman Catholicism to its own Protestant church and sometimes longed to return to the ancient fold. Through every upheaval, the Queen stood as living symbols of the nation's conscience, and as the ones who bore the brunt each time history's fulcrum shifted. And throughout every upheaval, Henry VIII always affirmed himself as the little god on earth, the supreme religious authority, the very mind and right hand of Almighty God in the flesh, accountable only to heaven. Whenever he issued a new religious decree, from deposing the Pope to redefining sacred ritual, the entire realm trembled at the undeniable assertion of power. Only the king's faith, not Rome's, was the ultimate truth. In this context, even the slightest hesitation in accepting or refusing a ceremony, whether processing in a parade or making the sign of the cross, could be branded heresy, a crime as dreadful as treason. Your immortal soul became a hostage. A single misstep in a public prayer service or a whispered petition in a private chamber was enough to mark you as a target for the most fanatical courtiers. Thus, Tudor religion, the crown's iron discipline, turned every act of worship into a high-stakes performance, where outward piety had to be flawless and true conviction counted for nothing. The lives of Henry's 6 wives have therefore been recorded by history in stark, brutal tropes. Catherine of Aragon, ever loyal to Rome, was ultimately labelled obstinate. Her divorce, a 6-year ordeal. People murmured, divorce, beheading, death. Yet Catherine was more than the discarded one. She symbolised steadfastness and integrity, enduring the loss of her name and the right to mother. Anne Boleyn, catalyst of reform, became the court's pariah, convicted of adultery, witchcraft and treason in a swift, ruthless drama, culminating in the execution block. Again people chanted, divorce, beheading, death. But in truth, Anne was the queen who launched a religious revolution that shook the kingdom to its core. Jane Seymour, mother of the prince, died young on her confinement bed, leaving only a sigh in the great hall. Divorce, death, survival. It was she who briefly healed the nation's religious wounds by giving birth to young King Edward VI, though she never saw him grow. Anne of Cleves, the king's beloved sister, alone escaped divorce or violent death. In exchange, she gained freedom, 3 riverside castles, and a generous income. People spoke, divorce, survival. Yet her story remained overshadowed by diplomatic failure and being judged unsuitable by a capricious king. Catherine Howard, barely out of her teens, fell prey to charges of illicit affection. Stripped of love and honour after less than 2 years, her fate echoed in the folk memory: divorce, beheading, death. Finally, Catherine Parr, the most learned of the 6, survived Henry, only to face political storms and near imprisonment for her Protestant sympathies. And so even her praise turned to ash. Divorce? Beheading? Survival? These short words only hint at deeper truths. When history recalls them, only the simplest refrains remain. Divorce, beheading, death, survival. 6 women, 6 lives ground in the mill of power and faith from glory to annihilation. In the end, Henry VIII's masterful PR campaign prevailed. Only his story was told in full, while these tragic queens became framed stereotypes, echoing through 5 centuries of memory. Catherine of Aragon hailed from the fervently Catholic kingdom on the Iberian Peninsula, where the tolling of Latin prayers echoed along the Mediterranean coast, and the Inquisition's tribunals served as a constant reminder of the Church's supreme spiritual authority. When she first set foot in England, the winds crossing the English Channel carried with them the sweet scent of Andalusian grapes and the smoky aroma of Sevillian sandalwood, cutting through the chill of the stone fortress. Dressed in a deep crimson velvet gown, her throat encircled by a weighty strand of pearls, she entered the great hall of Hampton Court to the applause of courtiers, a splendid commencement to the Anglo-Spanish alliance. For Catherine, the Catholic faith was not merely belief, but a way of life. Each day she attended 3 masses, an early service in the stained-glass splendour of the royal chapel at dawn, a midday liturgy in the sun-lit cloisters, and a quiet evening devotions on the castle's east-facing balcony, where she read Latin prayers by candlelight. She organised clandestine prayer gatherings for the city's poor, distributing loaves of bread and mugs of spiced wine, sweetened with warm milk, becoming known as the Compassionate Mother amid the kingdom's religious upheaval. Yet when Henry VIII demanded an annulment, Catherine lost far more than her husband. Those very love letters she had penned to him were weaponized as evidence of her stubborn disobedience. Her 24 years of unwavering loyalty and her close ties to the Spanish crown were recast as a seditious conspiracy. By contrast, Anne Boleyn emerged from a lesser-known English noble family, but captivated Henry with her modern bearing and keen intellect. She had been raised amid the rose gardens and vaulted wine cellars of Hever Castle, where Petrarch and Erasmus lined the shelves. Fluent in French and Italian, she absorbed the ideals of Lutheran and Calvinist reform that had spread from Geneva and Wittenberg. When Anne first appeared at court in a sleek, emerald-green silk gown with an off-shoulder neckline and her dark hair swept into a simple, jewelled chignon, Henry was enthralled. Beneath the cold brick arches of the East Wing, they discussed sola scriptura and the Bible's supremacy over labyrinthine ritual. Anne soon became the reformers' linchpin. She urged the king to grant benefices to Protestant clergy, orchestrated Thomas Cranmer's public sermons in St. George's Chapel, and transformed religious policy into a grand spectacle of power. But as her influence swelled, hidden daggers were drawn. Letters circulated accusing her of dangerous teachings were paraded before the royal court. Her fashionable short gown, once celebrated as a French chic statement, was denounced as immodest and unqueenly. When Anne miscarried her hope for Prince, Henry publicly proclaimed it divine disapproval. Within weeks, coerced confessions and fabricated evidence turned her into a traitor, leading to her public trial and execution at the Tower of London. Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn, one the steadfast symbol of long-standing tradition, the other a bold gale of reform, shared a tragic destiny. They became targets in Henry VIII's brutal struggle over faith and power. Their legacies echo not only in annulment decrees and royal indictments, but also in the extinguished candles of the royal chapel and the distant toll of dusk bells across the rooftops, reminders that even love and devotion can be twisted, tested, and destroyed at the whim of a single sovereign ruler. Jane Seymour, the good wife of Henry VIII, is immortalized in history as the quintessential ideal queen, gentle, humble, devoted to the crown, and blessed with the male heir the king so desperately craved. Historians note that she alone gave Henry the hope of a son, only to conveniently pass away just 12 days after Prince Edward's birth, a denouement both triumphant and tragic, forever etched in posterity. Yet few appreciate the cunning political strategy Jane orchestrated behind the palace's white velvet drapes. She was no naive maiden who merely happened to capture Henry's fancy. From the moment she arrived at court as Dame Seymour, she was courted by the conservative faction as a moral counterweight to Anne Boleyn, restoring the nobility's faith in tradition. Jane mastered the art of donning pristine white gowns, offering a soft smile and a timely curtsy, crafting an image of purity amid the court's tumult. More than a pretty figure, she whispered words of loyalty and duty in Henry's ear, leisurely strolls in the sunken garden, where she invited him to admire the blooming roses, subtly reminding him of his duty to safeguard the realm against schism. Every affectionate glance and gentle laugh was part of a carefully staged performance, securing the king's heart and confidence. By contrast, Anne of Cleves, the famously ugly bride, has endured literary and folkloric infamy as the victim of a disastrous diplomatic marriage, her portrait supposedly so flattering that Henry was startled and spurned her at first sight. Yet the truth is that Anne possessed a shrewd political mind and a gift for forging alliances that earned her the title the beloved sister of the king. She not only accepted the annulment, but skillfully negotiated the grant of 3 riverside castles and a generous annual income, establishing a rare independent life. In the maelstrom of court politics, she exhibited remarkable resilience. At her Richmond residence, she hosted intellectual teas, critiqued Renaissance poetry, cultivated friendships with reforming clergy, and maintained diplomatic ties with her native Hohenzollern family. Both Jane Seymour and Anne of Cleves, each in her own distinct manner, demonstrated how to transform the strictures of royal obligation into personal strength. Jane, seemingly delicate yet meticulously nurturing Henry's loyalty, temporarily healed the court's divisions and bore its longed-for successor. Anne, though rejected, turned her humiliation into liberty, outliving Henry and all 5 of his other wives. And yet history most often remembers them in 2 simple strokes. Bore an heir, then died, and rejected for looks, yet survived. Rarely does it acknowledge the quiet diplomacy, the endurance, and the political acumen that Jane and Anne employed. Few recall that, even in her darkest hours, Jane lit candles in prayer for the nation's fate, and that Anne continued to teach French to local gentlewomen to the accompaniment of reed pipes and the scent of damask roses. Thus, in the grand chronicle of Henry's reign, these two queens emerge not merely as footnotes in a royal divorce or annulment, but as complex figures who navigated treacherous power currents with grace and intellect. Beneath their regal attire lay calculated strategies of influence. Jane's whispered counsel in candlelit corridors and Anne's salons where new ideas blossomed. Their legacies remind us that true power often resides not in the throne itself, but in the subtle art of wielding influence from behind the scenes. Catherine Howard, the 17-year-old ingenue thrust into the merciless whirlpool of Tudor politics, became fodder for the court's most brutal power games. Born into a powerful but uneducated branch of the Howard family, she carried with her only vague memories of childhood whispers of sexual abuse and secret liaisons long before she understood their meaning. When Henry VIII, then 50 years old, slipped the wedding ring onto her finger, no one dared question her elevation beyond a diplomatic and psychological puppet. Instead, her youth and innocence were swiftly repurposed into a living emblem of the king's passion and renewal, even though she scarcely grasped the theological debates or ecclesiastical law that swirled around her. From the opulent coronation in St. George's Chapel to the glittering banquets in the Great Hall, Catherine greeted sumptuous feasts and courtly dances with wide-eyed enthusiasm, while silent courtiers meticulously recorded every gesture and furrow of her brow. The long stone corridors of Hampton Court, lit by stained glass windows depicting saints, became the stage for a perfidious drama. Rumours of her licentious nature spread like wildfire, despite no concrete evidence beyond the embellished accusations of her past. In an instant, Catherine's favour evaporated when the conservative faction led by Thomas Cranmer and other stern clergymen persuaded Henry that she represented a threat of heresy. On the fateful day when officials presented the charges of adultery and incest based on coerced confessions from her former suitors, she wept quietly before the assembled clergy, the candlelight catching her shocked, youthful face. The damp, moss-covered cell in the Tower of London witnessed her final descent. She bowed before the executioner's axe, utterly alone, denied the solace of confession or a priest's presence. By contrast, Catherine Parr, the most learned and ultimately surviving wife, stands as proof of intellect and diplomatic finesse. She served as Henry's devoted nurse during his final years of agonizing joint pain, and became the first English queen to publish under her own name, the Learned Princess. In her sunlit Chelsea library, where leaded windows cast kaleidoscopic reflections, she welcomed guests with herbal teas and exchanged theological discourse with Thomas Cranmer and John Fox. She also skillfully reconciled Henry with his daughters Mary and Elizabeth, each polished oak panel of the library bearing witness to her subtle negotiations, measured words before the Conservative Council, patient endurance of jibes about her overzealous reforms, and an unwavering belief in grace and mercy. Yet history has often glossed over these complexities. Catherine Howard is chronicled merely as the wanton girl, and Catherine Parr reduced to the last surviving queen. In truth, the fifth queen's tragedy and the princess, scholars' legacy stand as twin testaments, one to personal devastation, the other to academic and political achievement. Amid the dazzling brutality of Henry's reign, they were not mere archetypes of doom, but women of fierce ambition, profound suffering, and keen intellect each, forging her own path through the unrelenting currents of power. 6 women, 6 distinct lives, 6 proud identities who ventured into one of the most perilous courts in Europe. They were not fragile dolls. They were intelligent, ambitious, and resilient women, forced to learn how to survive within the labyrinth of Henry VIII's power. We have walked through the nightmare called marrying the most notorious king, witnessing physical dangers, psychological torments, political minefields strewn across the palace, and a historiography seemingly intent on erasing their names. The question remains, could an ordinary person survive? The survival rate was grim. 2 were executed, 1 died while giving birth, 2 were divorced and exiled. Only 1 emerged from her marriage, and even she passed away soon after. A survival rate of less than 1/2 hardly bodes well for any marriage. If you possessed Anne Boleyn's sharp mind, you might have enchanted the king, led him into schism with Rome, and helped establish the Church of England. You could deftly cultivate allies among the reforming theologians, and even preside over sermons in St. George's Chapel. Yet at the height of your influence, a single idle whisper, "They say she has 6 fingers," would shatter your career, place you in the sights of the royal court, and send you to the scaffold within weeks. If you were Jane Seymour, Henry's perfect wife, you could grant him his deepest longing, a male heir. You would tend the king after his jousting wounds, quietly bolster the crown, and appear at coronation in a pristine white gown that won the hearts of the court. But childbirth proved your undoing. Just 12 days after giving birth to Prince Edward, you succumbed to puerperal fever, leaving a kingdom in mourning. For Anne of Cleves, diplomacy became her shield. Though Henry rejected her at first sight as lacking appeal, you would not accept defeat. You negotiated a divorce settlement to your maximum advantage. 3 splendid castles along the Thames, a generous annual income, and the title, King's Beloved Sister. You outlived Henry and all 5 of his previous wives, wandering free through Richmond's gardens, listening to songbirds at dawn, and finding joy in quiet, reformist tea gatherings. Catherine Howard stands as a bitter testament to youth exploited. In less than 2 years beneath her honeyed tresses and radiant gowns, she captivated Henry, then fell from grace when her youthful indiscretions were manipulated against her. Unversed in court politics and cast as prey by the conservative faction, she ended her life with a tragic shriek under the executioner's axe, without a private confession, without a comforting hand. Finally, Catherine Parr, the wise wife and the sole survivor, embodied the power of intellect. She cared for Henry in his final, arthritic years, preserved peace at court, and became the first English queen to publish books under her own name. In her warm Chelsea study, sun filtering through leaded glass, she discussed theology with Thomas Cranmer, eased factional tensions, and laid the groundwork for Elizabeth's forthcoming reign. Yet history often remembers her in a single pale phrase: the last wife, the survivor. If you are compliant and unassuming, like Anne of Cleves, whose appearance Henry VIII cruelly deemed unattractive, you might escape with your head intact. Through diplomatic finesse, she avoided execution and secured her freedom, 3 splendid riverside estates, and a comfortable life in royal provision. But do not mistake this for unqualified victory. Every evening, she would still hear the mournful wind threading through the corridors of Hampton Court, remembering her first awkward days under the scrutinizing gaze of courtiers, who whispered debates over the style of her German hairpin. She understood all too well that her tractability was merely her ace in the political deck, and every small choice from how she sipped her wine to the angle of her curtsy was ground to dust in the grinding wheels of court intrigue. If you are youthfully naive like Catherine Howard, you may be swept away in the maelstrom of court politics before you even grasp where you stand. At 17, Catherine entered Hampton Court with a hopeful heart and innocent smile, only to discover that whispered rumours of her teenage affairs quickly became fabricated evidence of adultery and betrayal. Imagine her, alone in the cold confines of her cell, lifting her eyes to the flickering candlelight through iron bars, her chest tightening, knowing none, not a priest, not a friend, dared comfort her or answer her plaintive questions. If you are as intelligent and resourceful as Catherine Parr, you might assume you can outmaneuver even the most treacherous currents and emerge influential. She mastered the new Protestant theology, held profound conversations with Archbishop Cranmer, navigated the conservative faction with gentle diplomacy, and quietly ensured the well-being of Princesses Mary and Elizabeth. Yet, even amid her library of theological manuscripts and serene afternoon teas in the Chelsea study, she lived in constant fear that a single misreported remark or whispered accusation of heresy could destroy her career and possibly her life. The challenge was never solely about talent or decorum. It hinged on luck, timing, and forces entirely beyond any woman's control. Henry's favour shifted like the Channel tide, scorching one moment, freezing the next. Your fertility, or lack thereof, a stubborn tilt in your demeanour, even your taste in food or fashion, could be magnified into treasonous disobedience or spiritual apostasy. These 6 women could never simply swipe left on Henry's proposals, unmatch him with a flick of the finger, or flee after sealing their vows. They were trapped in a system that demanded perfection, punished any sign of weakness, and stripped away their autonomy even when its aftermath was supposed to be freedom. Whether Anne of Cleves negotiated her way to security or Jane Seymour sacrificed her life to produce an heir, each paid a heavy price. The inexperienced endured psychological chains, the learned braced themselves against royal propaganda assaults, and the gentle lost both reputation and life. None of them truly had a fourth option. This is no fairy tale with a happy ending. It is a tapestry of tragedies woven from threads of power, religion, and politics, where every breath could signal finality. So when we gaze upon their gilded portraits or leaf through dusty chronicles, let us remember that beneath each crown beat a fragile heart, and behind each regal step rang a tragic epic of survival along history's razor edge. And so, after several hours of travelling through the tragic yet splendid world of Henry VIII's Six Queens, we step back through the ancient wooden doors of Hampton Court, carrying with us a flood of emotions and invaluable lessons. This journey has been more than a vivid historical tableau. It has served as a mirror reflecting human nature, power, and the ways we shape our own destinies. First, inner strength does not always guarantee a spectacular victory. Anne of Cleves, mocked for her lack of conventional beauty, masterfully turned a political misstep into an opportunity, negotiating to retain her freedom, 3 magnificent riverside castles along the Thames, and the court's quiet respect. In today's world, when we face crises at work or in our personal lives, her lesson reminds us to negotiate wisely, set clear contracts for ourselves, and stand firm amid the storm. Second, sacrifice can redeem one's fate. Jane Seymour, mother of the prince, gave her life to ensure the birth of an heir. Even now, many women struggle to balance career and family, passion and duty. Jane's story teaches us that sometimes we must learn to pause and care for ourselves so that we have the strength to persevere through life's trials. Third, the tragic tale of Catherine Howard underscores the critical importance of preparation and knowledge. Unprepared and ill-equipped, she was swept up in the court's intrigues and met a heartbreaking end. In our fiercely competitive society, each of us must continuously learn and build skills to avoid being exploited